Today is May the 13th, 2008, and I'm in the north section of Dallas. And I'm at the home today of Mr. and Miss Bill and Gail Newman, William Newman. And Mr. and Miss Newman are certainly one of the great parts of history, for on November the 22nd, 1963, on that Shattered Friday, they were standing on the north side of Elm Street on the sidewalk as President John Fitzgerald Kennedy was assassinated. And my partner here, Steve Allred, and I, we've interviewed many witnesses in the last 4 years that were in Dealey Plaza that day, but we've never had the opportunity or the gracefulness of interviewing Mr. and Miss Newman. Of course, they've done many interviews, and that was a very, very tragic day. And I'm sure they remember their accounts, and that's why we're doing the interview with them today, because this is going to be the 45th anniversary coming up. And a lot of the witnesses that were in Dealey Plaza that day, many of them have passed on, and some met mysterious, unaccounted, unexplained deaths. But Mr. and Miss Newman is still living, and Officer Hargis, and people like that are still living. And we're trying to get these people on taped interviews for the cause of history and the truth. So, Mr. and Miss Newman, at this point in time, I'm going to ask you your first question. When you all got down to the plaza that morning, I understand that you all had been out to the airport and saw the president first.
That's correct, Mike. We had.
And when you left Love Field, you all came on downtown.
That's correct. What happened at Love Field was that Gail and our oldest boy, Bill, who was 4 at the time,
Yes.
did not get up to the fence to see the President and Mrs. Kennedy.
Yes.
My youngest son, Clayton, and I managed to get right up to the fence and saw the cars that went by. And as you know, the parade route had been published in the paper, and so we just jumped in our car and headed towards the intersection of Elm and Houston Street near the triple underpass to try to get ahead of the parade so we could get a good look at the president.
Yes, sir. Mr. and Miss Newman, approximately how long had you all been standing there when the car turned the corner and started down Elm Street?
We had probably been there less than 5 minutes.
5 minutes.
Very short time. I can remember that we parked not behind the school book depository, but the building across the street, and we walked up to the intersection of Elm and Houston, and there was a large crowd of people.
Yes.
So we just walked down the curb on the north side of Elm towards the triple underpass and fell in beside the last 2 people who were along the edge of the curb, which was 2 women. And we had been standing there probably less than 5 minutes when you could hear the cheer of the crowd and could hear the parade coming down Main Street.
Yeah, the 2 women you mentioned, I don't know if you've ever met them. One of them name was Jean Newman.
That's coincidental, isn't
And
it?
she lives in Malakoff, Texas. In fact, we're going to interview her next week.
I see.
The other lady was Cheryl McKinnon, who worked for Channel 8 News, and she's still living. I don't know where Miss McKinnon lives now. She left Dallas, but she is still living. She had on the black coat and the sunglasses. She was to your left, Miss Newman, and I think Miss Jean Newman was standing pretty much close to y'all there by the lamppost.
Right.
Wasn't too far away. Well, as the president's car turned the corner, Mr. and Miss Newman, in your own words, tell me what happened, what you saw and heard.
Well, I can recall seeing the president's car turn onto Houston Street off of Main, make that right-hand turn, could travel that short block of distance and turn left onto Elm.
Yes,
of course, the crowd was very excited, just as we were, to see the President of the United States. And as the car came towards us, he was out about the width of 1 lane from the curb lane. As he came towards us, the first 2 shots rang out. And it was a boom, boom, about like that. And what I thought at the time, Mike, was someone had thrown a couple of firecrackers beside the car.
Yes,
and I thought, you know, that's very poor taste for someone to do that. I recall seeing the president's arms come up, and I actually testified that he came up out of his seat, which in reality, it was just probably the reaction to when the bullet hit him in the back and apparently came out somewhere in this location. They were 100 or so feet probably from us, but as the car got closer to us, I could see Governor Conley in the car and him more or less stretched out, and the blood on his shirt and his protruding eyes. And just about that time, the car passed in front of us, and about as close as I am to Steve, probably some 10, 12 or so feet out from us, the third shot rang out, and I can recall seeing the side of President Kennedy's head blow off.
Yes,
I could see a mass of white and then the blood and fragments, and I turned to Gail and said, "That's it, hit the ground."
yes, sir.
We turned around and threw our kids back on the grass and covered them there. And I can remember looking back and, and seeing the car slow down and nearly come to a complete stop, and then accelerate and take off and go out of sight into the triple underpass.
Yes, sir.
I also recall Mike hearing Mrs. Kennedy holler, "Oh my God, no, they've shot Jack."
Yes, sir. And you heard her say that, you and Miss Newman.
Yes, and I can remember I thought she was trying to get out of the car. And as the Zapruder film shows, the Secret Service agent run up and push her back into the car.
Yeah, clean deal.
I found out years later what she actually did. She reached back there and picked up a piece of the president's skull
That she really did.
and gave it to him out at Parkland Hospital.
Yeah, and I understand that piece of skull is now in the medical archive of the FBI
Is it?
in Washington. That's what I've been told. I've never been there and seen it. That's what I've been told.
And we stayed on the ground probably a minute or so, maybe 2 minutes. And then when we got up, two men approached us. One of them was Jerry Haynes. He was known as Mr. Peppermint at that
Yes.
time. He was a local TV personality. And he came over towards us, and another man with him, and asked us what we saw. And we told him, and he said, "Would you folks go with us to WFAA?" And we said, "Sure." We started towards WFAA, and he stopped the car on the street. You think it was Main Street that he stopped the car on, or Commerce?
Close to Main Street.
Right. And
Close to Maine and Houston.
yeah.
Houston.
and told this man, said, "These people saw the president, which witnessed the president being shot. Would you drive us to WFAA?" And the guy said, "Sure." Jump in, and we drove over as short distances,
Yes.
And at that time, the Julie Bonnell show was going on, a cooking show.
Yes.
And we watched a few minutes of that, and they waited for clearance to put us on the air. And while we were waiting, the report came in that President Kennedy had been shot through the back and he was still alive. And we'd just seen the side of his head come off.
You didn't quite. You knew better than
No, that was, and actually, Mike, I think I was in a little bit of a state of shock. I mean, not that I couldn't handle myself, but
I'm sure you
but I was
human both.
somewhat confused. And then after our interview on the air, we were taken over to Sheriff Bill Decker's office,
Yes.
and Gail and I gave 2, if I'm not mistaken, of 16 affidavits that day.
Yes.
And
I've seen that one of the
and-
pictures that y'all in.
and they kept us there until 9 or 10 o'clock at night, I
At night.
think. And
Yes, sir.
and what they were actually doing, and then we were told what they were doing, they were reviewing, they being whoever, I don't know, the sheriff's office or the FBI, whoever it may.
Yeah, I
may
think
have
all three
been.
were involved, the Dallas Sheriff's Department,
And-
FBI, and the Dallas Police.
They were reviewing these affidavits and held us there just in case there were discrepancies or they wanted to re-interview us.
Ms. Newman, standing left to you, were standing on the left side of Mr. Newman, and you had one of your children close to you, I believe, holding on you. Do you recall, of course, I know it happened very fast, when the headshots hit the president, did you see any debris fly back or go forward?
I just when his head exploded, you could just see the debris fly sort of up.
Straight up?
Yeah.
Yeah, that's very true, and I'm glad you said that. I don't know if you and Mr. Newman have, of course, I know you've been doing this for years from that day, and certainly being standing where you were. You and Mr. Newman, and then the motorcycle officer, Mr. James Cheney, who was on the right side, y'all same side, Of course, Officer Hargis was on the left. I would say that y'all would certainly have to be the four closest witnesses that was close to the president. Like Mr. Newman said earlier, y'all were only 10 to 12 feet away, and you could have been much closer than that. And the reason I asked you the question about seeing something go out, you know, Officer Hargis, and I have Officer Hargis on tape interview, he was splattered with the brain debris, and that's why I asked you, maybe did you see that? Of course, with what was happening, I guess you wasn't really paying attention to that.
Well, no, I didn't notice the police officer, just sort of terrified in the moment. But I do recall seeing these bits
Yes, ma'am.
fly. I mean, they didn't fly backwards. What I remember is just
Straight
sunk
up in there.
straight up.
Yes. And Mr. and Ms. Newman, when the president was shot, and this, I know you all have been interviewed by many people, CBS and on down, and I remember the interviews you all did with Mark Oaks and other people. I don't know if you've ever been asked this question, and maybe I'm going to ask it in a different way. When you heard what is, I consider the last shot or shots, I believe there were 2 shots simultaneously. Could have been just one, I really don't know to this day. I believe there were 2. But when the president was hit in the head, in your opinions, and both standing where you were, did that last shot come from your left side or your right side or behind you, in your opinions?
Well, Mike, that's the big question, isn't it?
And you and I have talked about that before.
I always say that the headshot I thought came from behind, but it was the visual impact
Certainly.
of seeing the impact, the wound, the explosion, and President Kennedy going across the car seat towards Mrs. Kennedy.
Toward Ms. Kennedy.
And so most of the time when I say behind, people want to know behind my left meaning the 6th floor, behind my right meaning the picket fence. And I always leave it just with behind because it was strictly, my focus was on the president,
Certainly.
the car and the president.
You looking right at it?
So, you know, to actually say I know positively it came from behind, I don't, but I just know how he reacted. And so it was the visual impact that it had on me. And then you got to remember, I did not recognize the first 2 shots as even being gunfire.
Yes. Most
So I would rather not speculate left or right. I know I'd make 50% of the people happy maybe
yes,
if
sir.
I went
That's
one
when I asked you that
if I went one way or the other. But it was, I wished I could give you a more definitive answer. But it was the visual impact that it had on me as he went over towards Mrs. Kennedy.
You answered just I think the way you should have. Because, and the reason I asked you all that, Mr. and Ms. Newman, I'm sure you already know, I have talked to many researchers in the case. Robert Rowe, Josiah Thompson, Mark Lane, Stuart Galana, I meant the great researchers, and I said great researchers, people that's been doing this 30 years and longer.
Right.
And then, of course, the newer researchers of later years, and they said, well, you know, Mr. and Ms. Newman said the shot came from the grass. You know, one guy even says that he had talked to you all, and y'all told him that you turned in time to see the man running from the fence. And I told him, Mr. and Ms. Newman has never said that.
No, that's not correct.
To no one, in no interview.
No.
And he said, oh, yes, they did. And I said, oh, no, they didn't. I said, now, I know better than that. So that's why I asked that question, and I knew that you were going to answer that way because that's what you told Josiah Thompson in 1966, what you just told us. And Mr. Thompson, he was in the Dealey Plaza 2 years ago, and I discussed this with him. And he told me, he said, well, Mr. and Ms. Newman said that they saw the impact of the president's head, and it came somewhere from behind. He said they never said that it came from the grassy knoll. They didn't say it come from the book because they were focusing on the president, and they were looking right at him. And it happened in some 6 or 7 seconds. So they didn't even have time, which would also make sense. You didn't have time to stand there and say, well, the shot come up there, the shot came here, as many other witnesses.
No, my focus was on the car the entire time.
Certainly.
You know, Mike, when people interview us at the site, and they take our picture or they film us, I know which direction they're going with their theory,
Certainly.
because if they stand us in such a way that the picket fence is in the background, you know, or they stand us in such a manner that the 6th floor is in the background.
Yeah, I know that, yeah.
And
Picture y'all have been in.
so, you know, we don't try to direct them how to take our picture.
There
But,
was one photographer there that day named Richard Bothan. I don't know if you and Mr. Newman ever met him. Mr. Bothan died in 1984. He was standing across the street along with Jim Alkins, Ike Alkins, Art Rickaby. They were all photographers, and they were standing close to Mary Mormon. And now, do you and Miss Newman remember seeing Mary Mormon and Jean Hill? Of course, Jean Hill had on the famous red raincoat that day.
I don't remember seeing her. Like I say, we'd been there such a short time. I do recall seeing Mr. Zapruder,
Yes,
the man standing up behind us with the camera.
With the camera.
I remember that, seeing him and his the lady that was with him
Yeah, her name was
back
Earl
there.
Sisman.
Yeah, I remember seeing them, and I recall seeing the men on the steps. I think there was 3 of them. But you know, to tell you actually how many were there, the reason I can tell you there was 3 because I've seen pictures of them. But I can remember somebody standing along that area,
Have y'all got?
and yeah, and then the 2 ladies beside us,
Yes.
2 women beside us. But you know, that's pretty well it.
Yes.
I mean, there was a crowd of people, but nobody stood out in my mind other than the man back there with the camera.
Well, where y'all had walked to and standing when the president was shot, you all were pretty much the last 2 people as far as the main crowd coming down the sidewalk.
Yeah,
Because, of course, Mr. Hudson then will pass you all on the steps. They
Yeah,
were
we were
standing-
the last people to start.
Against the curb.
That's right, you really were. And of course, standing directly behind you on the pedestal, you can see Mrs. Zapruder in the films, the Knicks film and the much more film. You can see that. Another question I'll ask you, Mr. Newman, when the president was shot, you didn't see the actual piece of skull that Miss Kennedy reached out and picked up? You never saw that. I interviewed Charles Brim some years earlier. Of course, he died in 1996, and I talked to Mr. Brim in 1990 at his home over in Carrollton, Texas. And he told me that he saw of course, he was standing on the left side of the street across from you all. Yeah, I don't know if you remember seeing him. He had on a white shirt, and he had his little boy with him, Joe.
I remember. I know who he is, you know, from seeing pictures, but I don't recall him from that day.
And he said he actually saw the skull, and it was in his opinion it went to the left past him. And he was standing just to the left of Mary Mormon and Jean Hill. And the reason I asked you that, did you see Miss Mormon? Because, you know, she took the famous passing old picture.
Right.
And with her having the camera, I thought maybe you might have, of course, like you say, you were focusing on the car.
That's right.
Do you remember Governor Connolly being hit, or did you see him when his shoulder dropped?
No, I don't recall that. Like I say, when the first 2 shots were fired, I didn't recognize that anybody had been hit other than President Kennedy coming up like that.
Certainly.
And I actually kind of thought he was protecting his face or something at that time. And I didn't recognize Governor Connolly had been hit until they got closer to us, and I could see the blood on him and see the condition that he was in.
In just about 3 more minutes, we'll end it. Mr. Miss Newman, on that, when you all hit the ground, of course, your kids were covered over your kids, your 2 children. You were facing, at that point, you were facing Mr. Zapruder. And he jumped down off the pedestal. Did you all see that when he jumped down?
I didn't. I don't recall. I don't recall seeing that. I do recall seeing people run up the slope, you know, and go up towards the railroad
Do you
yard.
remember some of the policemen running up there?
You know, Mike, I kind of hate to say this because it's been disputed.
Well, I know you're telling the truth.
But what I'm telling the truth is I remember it.
Yes.
You know, the truth is a difficult thing
But
sometimes.
you're telling the truth as you remember what
But
you
as
saw.
I remember it, some men jumped off the car behind the president, one or two of them, and they had something like a Thompson submachine gun or something, a weapon like that, and they went up the slope.
Yes, sir.
Now, if I'm crazy or whatever, but I do recall seeing that, but it was more than just this one or two people. But that's what caught my attention when I saw the weapon.
Well,
And,
Mr. Newman, I'll ask you to stop right there because I want to tell you something. You know, you're not crazy. And the reason I asked you that today, I don't know if you've ever been told this. Miss Marion Chisholm is still living. She lives over in the Pleasant Grove section of Dallas today. And I don't know if you and Miss Newman recall seeing her. She's a black lady, and she was there with her husband, John Arthur Chisholm. They had their little 2 or 3-year-old son with them.
Yeah.
They were standing by the man known as the Umbrella. They're standing, Umbrella Man. They were standing right next to him. And what you just said, Mr. Newman, I just talked to Miss Chisholm 3 days ago. And Miss Chisholm has always been very reluctant to do an interview with anybody. She's never done an interview, and she's 70, I think she told me she's 76 now. You can see her in many of the photographs. But in the book, Pictures of the Pain, what you just described is in that book, those pictures. And those pictures were taken, some by Mr. Richard Botham and some by Art Rickaby. And there is a man that appears to have he's definitely got a gun in his hand, there's no doubt. But many people say that didn't happen, and it did happen because Miss Chisholm says that one of those men that you're talking about actually, and I think he had passed you all, he tackled Mr. Chisholm because Mr. Chisholm was heading up the hill toward the fence. And he told Mr. Chisholm he was a Secret Service agent after he tackled him and he showed him his badge. And she talks about that to this very day. And these are some of the aftermath facts that happened that a lot of people don't know. And of course, people ask the question in references to people running to the grassy knoll, and that's why I asked you that. And you're certainly not saying that you saw shots come from the grass. No, you never said that. But everybody has many over the years wondered why so many people begin to run toward the grassy knoll. I've got Officer Hargis on tape interview, and he talks about, of course, he's the man that coined the phrase. He said, I ran up the grassy knoll, and he did. You see that in the films. And he says, amazingly, when I got there, he said, I didn't see anything, Mike. He told Stephen that, and we have him on tape interview with that. And he initially, though, first thought the shot came from that. That's why he ran up there with his pistol in his hand. He talks about seeing Officer Roscoe White and several other police officers come around the pagoda, the white structure. They came from the backside. And my next question is, so at that point when you all were on the ground, you and Miss Newman, you all never went up on there?
We headed towards there, but we
Never got up there completely?
No, because Jerry Haynes walked up to us.
Certainly.
And we left, you know.
Scott Myers told me, he said, oh, Mr. and Miss Newman was interviewed there on the grass. And I said, no, they weren't. They never went up on the grass, you know, up on the pavilion where the bench was. And
No.
the two big trees.
No.
That's what I thought. And I wanted to clear that up. And
Well, Mike, I never saw anything wrong with the Secret Service man or whoever it was running up there. But after making that statement years ago and then being told that nobody left the parade, nobody left one of the cars
well,
and went up
someone, we don't know who
then
it
I
was.
just
Yeah.
then I just stopped. If someone asked me, I'd answer the question, but I never
Well,
volunteered.
you and I had talked about that before, and you had told me this story, and then I
Right.
talked to Miss Chisholm 5 times, and she always mentions that.
The other thing that I said way back there, you may recall, was that the car stopped. But when I say stopped, I only mean that, like you hit apply the brakes and then get off the brakes and take off. It was when I look back. But you know, in the Zapruder film, it never shows the car stopping.
Many people said it.
So, you know, if I say stop, then somebody interprets that the car stopped for 30 seconds or a minute or a long period of time. And then they make a lot out of that.
Yeah.
So somebody asked me the question, I volunteered, but I do think the car stopped momentarily. And when I say momentarily, I'm just talking about looking over and seeing the brake lights, and it hit and kind of rocked the car. And one of them had, you know, a two-way radio or phone or something to their ear.
Yes.
and then they floorboarded it. You know, by the time the Secret Service got over and the agent got over in the car, the other Secret Service agent, they floorboarded and took off. So we're just talking about seconds
Yeah.
here, you
2
know.
seconds even, maybe, yes.
Yeah.
I know exactly
Yeah.
what you mean, Mr. Newman.
Okay.
And you know, I told you this before, I was born in 1955, an 8-year-old kid. Me and my aunt, Miss Hattie Mae Williams, and several of our neighbors, Miss Jeffy Spencer and Miss Millie Perkins, we all went down to see the president. We were standing up on the corner by the Daltex building.
Mm-hmm.
And of course, we were much further away from where you and Miss Newman were. And of course, I recently met you. Well, I met you about 5 years ago, first time. And had never talked to you up till that time. Many witnesses that were there that day never met each other. Maybe 20 years later, during the anniversary, people going down on the November the 22nd.
Mm-hmm.
But of course, you and Miss Newman have always been a kind of a standout of the witnesses because of where you were standing, and you've seen in all the photographs, most definitely. The last question I'm going to ask you, Mr. and Miss Newman, and this will be the last question. As your lives have went on to this point, and I hope it continue to go on many, many, many more years, and I'm sure they will. Like myself, I'm sure you may have had some health problems. I certainly have. Oh, one other thing I want to mention before I ask you the last question. Also in the motorcade that day, one of the 3 leading motorcycle officers, Stavis Ellis, he was your uncle, right?
My
Miss Newman?
uncle, yes.
Yeah, Steve and I went to his home. 2003, it was the year of the 40th anniversary, and we talked with him and had a long, long conversation. Boy, he loved to go back and remember things, and he knew a lot of history, I tell you.
Oh, yeah.
And he told us he joined the force in '46, and he was a sergeant at that day.
Mm-hmm.
And do you remember? Did you wave at him?
We
when
waved
passed?
at him, yeah.
He
We
told us
waved
that.
at him.
Mm-hmm.
And he told us later, we talked to him a couple of days later, that he was on the other side of the underpass
Yeah,
when
that's what he said.
the shots were fired, and the thought ran through his head is, I hope he knew there were shots. And
Yeah, he heard him.
knew where we were standing. He just thought to himself, I sure hope those kids are okay.
Okay.
Of course, he called us all kids.
Yeah.
And
Yeah, he was a great gentleman.
yeah, he
talked
said
to him,
that at Parkland,
Yeah.
that Miss Kennedy had that chunk of skull in
Yeah,
it.
he saw it.
And she handed it to someone and said, you might need this,
Yes.
or something to that effect.
Yeah, that's exactly. In fact, the man that was driving Vice President Johnson's car, Herschel Jacks, he was a Texas State Trooper. He was driving the car that Johnson was riding in, and he said he was standing there just as Officer Ellis was, and he said Miss Kennedy walked up to Dr. Jenkins and told her, said, "Here's a piece of my husband's head. This may help." Something to that effect. They all saw that at Parkland. And the last question I wanted to ask you all, of course, as the shot hit the president in the head, you certainly were looking at that, and but do you remember hearing what sounded like a shot hitting glass at any time?
I don't.
In those, you never did. And what I'm referring to, and I'm sure y'all have seen the pictures over the years, there's definitely one shot in the windshield, the front windshield of the limousine. There was definitely one, and possibly 2. And a lot of the witnesses said they heard that. And it was just about the time, and some of the witnesses said that the president said, "Oh my God, I'm hit." I don't know if you've ever heard that. And that's written in many books. In fact, Josiah Thompson's book, 6 Seconds in Dallas, is in there. And where he would have said that, he would have still been he hadn't got to y'all yet, so he wouldn't have heard that. But then Governor Connolly hollered, "Oh my God, they're going to kill us all." Did you,
I've heard that statement. I didn't hear.
you didn't hear it?
I didn't hear it
That's
that
what I-
day. Yeah.
And I wanted to ask you, did you hear that? Because they said it was pretty loud. Miss Chisholm said that she remembered the governor saying that, and he had kind of turned to his right, and as if to look at the president.
Mm-hmm.
And then she said just maybe a second later, the head was called down by y'all at that time, or 2 seconds. And Mr. Brandt, he was standing there up from you all. He was standing pretty close to the umbrella man, the man with the umbrella. You don't recall seeing the man with the umbrella that day?
No.
Well, it's my understanding, I think he may have been one of the 16 affidavits. Is that
You look,
pop?
yeah. The man came forward in '78 when they had the House Select Assassination Committee. And did you all testify at that committee?
No.
I didn't think so. His name was Louis Witt. In fact, he lives up in Argyle, Texas to this very day.
Really?
I believe he's 72 now. And he says he was the umbrella man, that he did open the umbrella. And was, he said he was jousting the president. He didn't care for President Kennedy's politics, and he was, this is what he said. Of course, some of the great researchers don't believe it was even him, but this man did come forward and testify.
I
I don't know if it was or not. I'm like you all. And you know, Mr. and Miss Newman, so many things have been said about the Kennedy assassination. There's so many theories. I don't think we'll ever know the truth. I will ask you this: in your opinion, of being where you were that day, and if you ever even studied this or not, do you believe that Lee Harvey Oswald shot the president?
Mike, I don't know. I think you could take, this is not answering your question directly, but let's say conspiracy or the act of one lone assassin. I think you could take either position real easy.
Really?
Now, what's boggled my mind over the years is there's quite a few people have claimed they saw something from behind the fence. Now, my question there is, all these people lying, or are they telling the truth? I mean, you've got a handful of people that claim that, but some of these people have kind of discredited themselves over the years. You know, I'm not going to go to naming individuals.
Oh, no, that's fine.
But
I do that.
but you know, that's the thing in the back of my mind, and so was there connection Oswald with Ruby? You know, it's
Yeah,
the case has been made that there is, but
Yes, sir.
whether that's factual or not, or
I
made
believe
up.
it is. I have people on tape interview that knew Jack Ruby in the 50s and knew Officer Tippit and some who knew Oswald, and they all say that they all three knew each other. Tippit and Oswald had known each other a very short period of time, as to where Ruby and Tippit had known each other for several years. In fact, we talked to Officer Ellis about that, and he, you know, Jack Ruby knew a lot of Dallas police officers. Now, that's just factual.
Sure.
A lot of people may try to deny it, but he did. He knew several Dallas police officers personally, and he would go to the police department quite a bit, and they knew him. And I had one detective told me, he said, Mike, he said, Jack came to the police department so much. He said, at one time, before I really got to know him, he said, I thought he was a detective, because he knew several police officers. And many police officers have said that, even Jim Lavelle. And
Well, he seemed to cater to them.
he did, and some way or another he knew him. Of course, being in the fact that he was a nightclub owner, and some people say he was in the mafia, part of the mob, which that's been controversial over the years itself, as you all know. And that's why I was saying so many things are coming. That's why I wanted to do this interview with you and Miss Newman, Mr. Newman, and because you've always told the truth about what you saw that day, as many other people, some people added to or taken away from it, if you want to go to that area. But we tried to get people of factual statements, and of course, where you were, you couldn't have been no more factual as to what you saw. And Mr. and Miss Newman, I tell you, you were a great part of history. It was a sad thing that you and other witnesses that were there had to witness. And you know, Officer Hardis told me something a few weeks ago. He said, Mike, he said, I'm 75 now. And of course, where he was on his motorcycle just to the left of Miss Kennedy, he couldn't have been any closer on that side. And he says he still wakes up at night sometime to this very day. And he can see that day. He said he sees this festival in his dream, and something is about to happen that he knows he has no control over. He says that all the time. Officer Harkins and I are very close. We've known each other 39 years this year. And I met Officer Harkins over at Bowles Story Junior High School. They had the youth action centers at that time. And he was the police officer there, and that's where I met him when I was going to junior high school in Oak Cliff, Bowles Story. And I would say after 2 weeks, about 2 weeks after I met him, we talked about the Kennedy assassination. And also being in Oak Cliff, living in Oak Cliff, as you all did in earlier years, many of the police officers that were in Dealey Plaza that day patrolled Oak Cliff. And in my association with Officer Hargis and my friendship with he and Officer O.E. Stanton, I met many of these policemen that were there in Dealey Plaza that day. And I've talked to countless of them. And some of them say shots came from the book depository, and I'm talking policemen only. Some of them say shots come from the grassy knoll. Some of them say shots come from both directions. It's just something I guess we'll never know. We'll never know the whole great scenario. But I do say this, and I want to say this in front of Mr. and Ms. Newman in this interview. People that were in Dealey Plaza that day know what they saw and heard. Mr. and Ms. Newman know where they were standing. They know where they saw and heard that day, and regardless to what, it may be a person that was 5 or 6 feet away from you all that said something totally different, but the fact is they were all there. And these researchers that have come forward with all this other, I call it hullabaloo, because some things that have been said over the years are not true, and people that were actually there that day, and certainly in the grace of still living as Mr. and Ms. Newman are, they know what they saw and heard that day, and they tell their stories as to what they saw and heard. A lot of people try to change people's statements, and you can't do that. I talked to many police officers who said they have read statements that they supposedly said that day or 2 weeks after so on and so on. J.C. White told me one time, he said, Mike, he said, I never said there was a train on the bridge, even though it's written in many, he said, I never even had such interview. But they got it written down that Officer White said a train crossed the bridge as the president was shot. And he was standing up on the bridge along with Officer J.W. Foster and Officer Earl B. Brown. There were 3 Dallas police officers on the bridge, the overpass, along with 14 railroad workers, Sam Holland being the most famous. And he never made such statement, but yet it's in several books. And Officer White died a few years ago, and it always bothered him. And there have been many statements written in books and things that are not true or have been made up. And I think this has been one of the flaws of all the great controversies of the Kennedy assassination, and also the fact people that have really tried to get to the truth, but 45 years later, I think it's going to stand as it is. Whether the Warren Commission, I will say myself, I don't believe the Warren Commission was totally right. And I will also say, as I've said in every interview I've done, myself personally, I believe the failed shot, or the last shot, came from the grassy knoll. I also believe the shot hit the president in the back of the head from the window. I believe 2 headshots hit him at the same time. And I believe that because of the medical evidence, the physical and photographic evidence, and the way the president's head looked in the autopsy pictures that I have seen over the years. Josiah Thompson, and he interviewed you all early in the 60s, and he, in his book, the drawings are in there, he believes the same thing, that 2 shots hit the president simultaneously, and I'll always believe that. I don't know how many shots were fired. Most people said 3, and I think you said y'all heard basically 3. Some people said 3, some said they only heard 2. Some people said they heard as many as 10 to 11 shots. So here we go again with that, over the years too, and as to how many shots were fired, and then how long the shooting were from the first shot to the last. And I think Josiah pretty much summed that up in 6 seconds in Dallas. I think it happened in about 6 seconds. But Mr. and Ms. Newman, it's been a pleasure being in your home today, and it's been a pleasure talking with you and seeing you again. And the 45th anniversary is coming up, and I'm sure if you're in good health and living, you all will probably be down there. And I think it'll probably be like the 40th. A lot of people are supposed to be, they're supposed to have some big shenanigan there again this year. I don't know, one of the groups. But sad and tragic day, and you all were certainly a great part of that. Could have been no closer. And Steve and I thank you for the interview, and I
Well,
hope
thank you, Mike.
continued life and good health, and may God bless us all.
Okay.
Thank you.
You bet.
Today is September the 23rd, 2008, and I'm sitting here at the Quality Inn Hotel at the corner of I-35, Stemmons Freeway, and Walnut Hill in Dallas, Texas. And my friend, Mr. Steve Stiles, is doing this interview with us. He's doing the camera work today. And the man sitting immediately to my right, this is Officer Robert Rowe of the Dallas Police Department, retired. And Officer Rowe served the Dallas Police Department, I think, late 1955 till 1981. Is that correct?
About 1980.
1980. And Officer Rowe, he wore the badge with pride and dignity and respect and merit the way it should be, as many old officers that I know, old-time officers, that joined the force back in the 50s and early 60s. And of course, Officer Rowe at the time, in November of 63, he was employed by the Dallas Police Department in a kind of an undercover line of work at that time. And we're interviewing him today because on that fateful Friday, November 22nd, 1963, at approximately 1:25 to 1:45 p.m. that evening, Officer Robert Rowe was present at the Texas Theater, where the suspected man, Lee Harvey Oswald, who was suspected and who has been said to have killed President Kennedy, that's where Oswald was captured and arrested by several Dallas police officers, Officer Robert Rowe being one of them. So Officer Rowe, saying that, we'll get right into the interview. Officer Rowe, when did you join the Dallas Police Department?
Well, I went to work as a civilian to begin with in the jail, and for about a year and a half or so, and then later on I took my police training and got out on the street in uniform in early 1956.
Early 1956. And just for the record, did you all have partners then, or were you by yourself, or did you have a partner?
Most of us working in the patrol division at night, in the evening hours, night hours, two-man squads. In the daytime, unless there was a rookie officer training, usually there was just one officer.
You were there, yes, sir.
And of course, the traffic division, traffic investigators working accidents, they work by themselves.
Yes, sir. Now, during that time when you went on the street in early 1956, and you at that time were a full-fledged Dallas police officer, now, did you know Officer J.D. Tippett at that time?
Yes, sir, I did.
And I think Officer Tippett probably joined the force a few years before you had.
Maybe a couple of years,
Yes,
two and a half years before.
You also knew Officer B.W. Hargis, Bobby Hargis.
Yes, sir.
Officer Hargis is a very dear friend of mine. I've known him many years. He's like family, and you and he were both on the force at the same time. Well, now, Officer Rowe, at approximately, and I don't know the exact time, I don't know if you remember the exact time, but we'll just say somewhere around 1:30 to 1:50, anywhere in those 20 minutes, you went to the Texas Theater that day, November
Yes, sir.
22nd, 1963.
Yes, sir.
And what purpose did you go to the theater for, sir, that day?
On that day, I was working undercover out of the Narcotics and Vice Division. My partner and I, Sergeant T.O. Troutman, who happens to be deceased now, we were dressed in plain clothes, beard, mustaches, long hair, and I had long hair then, ponytail. We drove into the alley after hearing on commercial radio. We didn't have a police radio at that time. In fact, the Dallas Police Department didn't have walkie-talkies in those days. And we didn't have a police car. We were driving an old pickup truck. We heard on commercial radio that they had spotted or heard that a suspect in the J.D. Tippett murder not too far from there, about 8 blocks away,
7 or 8 blocks, yes, sir.
had been cornered or went into the theater. And there was a group of squad cars out front, and some detectives were there, and a crowd of citizens gathering,
In the front of the
uniform officers, detectives, going in the front door. We were in the alley.
Yes, sir.
There were 2 uniform officers out there. My partner and I, Sergeant, we were in plain clothes, but we knew the 2 officers in the alley, and there were about 5 or 6 civilian people out there too.
Yes, sir.
And this incident happened so quickly, there was never really a large crowd had gathered.
Out in the alley where you all were.
And there was no particularly large crowd out in front, unless you see those pictures in the journals of the front of the theater. Looks like to be maybe 15 or 20 people out there.
Yes, sir. Now, Officer Rowe, when you entered the back of the theater, and y'all went through the back door, you and your partner and 3 or 4 other officers.
They opened the back door. In fact, I heard them just as they opened the door. Some sergeant or lieutenant in there said, "Open that back door. We need to get some light in here."
Yes, sir.
It was an old theater then, and it had a couple of 40-watt bulbs in there, and they needed some light in there. And so opening that back door, which is the fire escape, it's going to let some light in.
Yes, sir. Most definitely.
And that's when the officers knew us, and so we went on in. I just stepped inside the door, and my partner went on up to the lobby.
Up toward the front of the theater, or in the lobby area of the theater.
Because the theater faces sideways to us.
Yes, sir, it did.
And if he walks straight ahead, he'll go straight to the lobby.
Yes, sir. Now, Officer Rowe, when you entered the back of the theater, I do believe, you tell me if I'm wrong, Officer Maurice Nick McDonald was one of the officers that went in through the back with you.
No, he didn't know
already-
anybody. He was already in the
He was
theater.
already in the theater.
And he was standing behind the man that was found to be Oswald later on.
Later on.
And he was sort of standing in the aisleway or standing in the row behind Oswald. And Oswald was facing the screen to what would be my left now.
Yes, sir.
And Officer McDonald was standing silently beside him. What the sergeants and lieutenants in there were doing was stationing officers behind each group, and there were 12 or 13 people in there. Now, some of them were asleep, some of them were drunk, and they were waking them up. And I heard when they opened the door, "Stand up and put your hands on your head,"
That's what some officers said
several times.
several times. Do you know if that particular time was this particular officer talking to Oswald, or?
The officer that was hollering the command was talking to everybody.
Okay.
And Oswald did stand up and put his left hand on his head. And when the door came open and the light went into the theater,
Yes, sir.
I saw him stand up and look toward the back door, because there weren't that many people there. And he moved over 3 or 4 seats toward the back door as if he was going to run toward us.
Toward the back of the theater. To the exit. Yes, sir. I got you.
To the side of the theater.
Side of the door. Yes, sir. Now, at that point in time, when that particular thing happened, at that very point, Nick McDonald had pretty much was, I would say, 3 or 4 feet away from Oswald at that time.
And there was a seat in between them.
Yes, sir.
A row of seats between them.
And when Officer McDonald approached Oswald, did you hear him say anything to Oswald?
Well, see, Oswald stood up the first time and moved over toward the back door, and then he sat down again.
Yes, sir.
McDonald moved over with him.
Yes, sir.
And of course, they were about 25 feet from me,
Yes, sir.
maybe 30 feet
Away from you.
from me, and I was standing just inside the back door. I heard right quick after they told him to stand up again, he put his hand on his left hand on his head, and he had a loose shirt that was not tucked in, and I believe it was a long sleeve shirt.
Yes.
I can't remember that part of it. Oswald came up. I was told this later on. I couldn't see it. Oswald came up with a pistol from his belt underneath this shirt,
Yes, sir.
and Officer McDonald was over behind him.
To his left side.
And when he got the pistol up about right here, the shirt fell off the pistol, and we all heard, "He's got a gun."
That's what they said.
Loud and right quick. He's got a gun. And at the same time, Officer McDonald dove or leaned over that row of seats and grabbed that pistol with both hands. And of course, he tumbled over in the seats, old hard wooden seats, had some padding on them, had some padding on the arms, but they were made out, the arms were made out of metal, and the back were made out of wooden.
Yes, sir.
And he crumpled himself up in there with Oswald, and then in a few seconds said, "I've got it, I've got it."
See it.
So everybody more or less took it for granted he got the pistol, which he did. And in the tussle, Oswald pulled the trigger, but the hammer hit in Officer McDonald's hand somewhere. I can't tell you exactly where, but everybody
Somewhere in
figures here,
Yeah.
or it might have been in this part, but he had 2 or 3 stitches later on and started bleeding on him and Oswald.
And of course, when that happened, that defected the gun from firing.
Now, the gun did not fire.
The firing pin would not hit.
Right.
Now, at that point in time, did several officers charge?
Several of them. Most of them were plain clothes. One of them was uniform.
And you were one of them.
Officer Ray Hawkins was in uniform. And Sergeant Jerry Hill, who was big and heavy set, he hollered, "I can't get to my handcuffs. Somebody give me some handcuffs." And he was down in the pile there, grabbing and shoving. And they were all trying to get a hold of him. And there was another detective who's deceased now, Bob Carroll. And then there was an officer,
I believe Kenny Lyons was one of them.
Kenneth Lyons, and several officers,
Paul Bentley
Hudson,
and T.A. Hudson.
T.A. Hudson. And there were, he was in uniform, and Lyons was in uniform, and then Bentley, Paul Bentley was a detective. He's the one that's seen in the photograph coming out the front door and has a cigar in his mouth.
Yes, sir.
And
Who just recently passed away.
who just recently passed away,
Last 2
age 86, 85.
He was up in age, yeah.
And they wrote a list of officers later on, and of course naturally they left me off the list, because if you're working undercover, you're not supposed to be put on any kind of report
Certainly.
unless it has something to do with your undercover police business. And of course we weren't supposed to be there that day.
But
We just happened to drive by.
yeah, you were in the vicinity of the suspect where it had been reported that
And
he
that
went in.
particular day, I didn't really get my hands on Oswald. Sergeant Jerry Hill said, "Give me some handcuffs," and there was a uniform officer way over there, and he was reaching this way and couldn't quite get there, so I handed the handcuffs from the officer to Sergeant Hill.
You gave the handcuffs to Sergeant Hill.
Right,
from this other officer.
I just reached
Got 'em.
about that area over there to this area over here with some handcuffs, and that's as close to history as I got.
Well,
I just happened to be there. I really didn't
that's
do
pretty
anything.
close. You were right. You
But
were right there.
I was on the scene.
Yes, sir. And you saw him you saw the officer when he handcuffed Oswald.
Right.
Now, did Oswald put up a fight Did you ever
Well,
see him
he was struggling and everything, and of course down in between those seats and everything, there were so many officers ganged up around there.
Yes, sir.
It looked like one of these wrestling matches on television, you know. And there was some pulling and shoving and arm throwing, and he might have gotten hit by the officers, or he might have hit one of the officers. And I understood there was a story after it was over with. It's Officer McDonald said he was hit in one side of the face.
Yes, sir.
But see, Officer McDonald went headlong down in those old hard seats too, and how he was hurt might have been hitting those seats.
Could have been, yeah, it's reported that Oswald had hit him.
And Detective Bentley hurt his knee quite a
Yeah.
bit.
Now, also, Rowe, this is something I wanted to clear up for years, and of course, you being as close as you were, you couldn't have been much closer, and you certainly, as you say, you gave Officer Hill the handcuffs as he handcuffed Oswald from the other officer, so you were right there.
And that's another thing. Sergeant Jerry Hill, we've been friends for years. In fact, he was working in the personnel section when I was hired back in 1955.
Yes, sir.
And I'd known him down through the years, but that particular day, he doesn't remember me handing him the handcuffs. And of course, the way I was dressed that day, I hadn't seen him in about a year
Yes,
or
sir.
two.
Yes, sir.
And of course, my name was not on any reports. And I've talked to several of those officers that are still living, and the ones that are passed on, and nobody remembers me being there. Well, if I'm not there, I'm not going to get reported doing anything wrong, am I?
Well, I tell you, I have spoke with Officer Tommy Hudson. I spoke with Bob Carroll before he passed away, and Kenny Lyons. Another officer that was there at that time was Hal Summers.
Yeah.
And they all confirmed that you definitely were there,
Okay.
but you were working undercover. And of course, they knew that being police officers. But they all told me that you were right there at the scene when all
Well,
was
you
arrested.
know, close.
Close enough. Now, this is something I want to clear up, Officer Rowe, today, and I know being where you were, you can clear this up for me. There's been a report that's been stated many years, I don't know if there's any truth to it or not, that as Oswald was being arrested and as they were trying to get the handcuffs on him, is what you were talking about just a few moments ago, did you ever see any police officer hit Oswald in the back of the head with the butt of a shotgun? Did you
No,
ever see that?
I never did.
You never saw that?
No.
Yeah, and
Now,
where
when
you were, you certainly
after
would've
they
saw it.
turned him and stood him up in those rows of seats,
Yes, sir.
they took him out the other end to an aisleway.
Yes, sir.
Then they took him straight to the lobby, and then I lost
That's when you
sight
lost
of
sight
him.
of him, yes. No,
Now-
this was reported, so what you just said is,
From the very instant that the police knew or thought he was in the theater, till the first officers got there in the front, till they got him out, handcuffed and gone down to the car, no more than 15 to 18 minutes went by.
that's about how
It
long
was all snap, 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 go.
Yeah. And
It was quick.
I certainly know that's true, because I've always said 18 to 20 minutes, yes, sir.
And like I said a while ago, there were there were one or two or several reporters, news reporters there, newspaper reporters, magazine reporters or something, but no one had a camera. All the pictures you see coming out of the lobby, old dark lobby, and coming out into the sunlight out front were all made by amateurs and sold and copyrighted for later publication. There were no pictures made in the back. There were no pictures made inside the theater, except when they just came out of the lobby. You can see them coming into the sunlight.
That's very true, sir, and I've seen those photographs, and what you said is just as true can be. Also, Rowe, let me ask you a question, and this is the last thing we'll talk about the arrest. This is another thing that has been said. I think you and I have discussed this before, and I've discussed it with many other police officers and researchers. There was a report, or there's been statements made, supposedly, I I don't know if this happened or not. I wasn't there. You may be able to shed some light on it for me now. Did you at any time, knowing Jack Ruby, did you see Jack Ruby anywhere in the Texas theater at the time Lee Harvey Oswald was arrested?
No, sir.
You did not see him?
Never.
Do you recall another arrest other than Oswald's arrest?
My partner and I left out the door as soon as they got the handcuffs on him, and I saw him take him to the front. Well, my partner came on by and he said, let's go, let's get out of here.
And y'all went back out the same door?
We went out the back door.
That you came in? And so
after we went out, there's one of the officers on the outside secured that back door.
Yes, sir.
And then they started taking charge of the other people that were in there to get statements. And I understand they found 4 or 5 kids that had skipped school,
Yes, sir.
that snaked in.
Yes, sir.
They climbed over a plywood board and were hiding up in the balcony.
Balcony area, yeah. Well, I know one man that was there. He is now a local radio personality here in Dallas, and his name was Mr. Davis, and he confirmed everything you just told me because he saw the whole thing. Everything that you just said, Mr. Davis has told me for years that it happened just that way.
Happened real quick.
Yes, sir.
And incidental.
Now,
with safety to all the officers, especially McDonald.
Now, Officer Rowe, you knew Jack Ruby several years before all of this happened.
I knew him very well.
And it has been reported that Jack Ruby, of course, and I know you know this, that it's said that Jack Ruby was part of the underworld, organized crime, the mafia, whatever term you may want to use. In your opinion, and in your years as a police officer and experience as a police officer, and in knowing Jack Ruby, what would be your opinion of Jack Ruby? What kind of man was it in your
Well, we always figured, and it was substantiated many, many times, that he was connected with the mafia.
Yes, sir.
In his early days, he's Jewish boy, grew up in Chicago.
Yes, sir.
Name was Rubenstein.
Yes, sir.
He dropped the steam when he came to Dallas to be playing Jack Ruby. He was in the nightclub business, and in his early days in Dallas, he also was listed with our department as a bookmaker or a mob fix-it man.
Yes, sir.
And a lot of the officers knew him because a lot of the officers worked and patrolled his nightclubs.
Yes, sir.
And he had strip clubs in the downtown area way back in the years when there weren't as many strip clubs as they are. There were only 3 or 4 downtown Dallas.
Yes, sir.
And of course, they were strictly regulated in those days with the liquor laws.
Yes, sir.
And Jack would get acquainted with officers, and of course, the statute of limitations have run out on me for years, but Jack Ruby made several car payments for me.
Yes, sir.
He even handed me $100 bills sometime and told me to be sure and pay my rent.
I've always heard that from several officers.
And we worked the downtown Carousel Club, and he also had a club at the time of the assassination. He had another club out on Oak Lawn, in the Oak Lawn area,
Yes, sir.
called the Vegas Club.
Johnny Vegas Club.
And it wasn't, neither one of them were very big clubs. Neither one of them would hold 100 people,
Yes, sir.
you know, less than 100 people, seating or standing. But he was connected, and there are several mob members living in and around Dallas at the time where we had photographs and phone messages and various things, how they were keeping in contact with each other.
In your opinion, Officer Rowe, of course, being on the force at that time in the mid-50s up to 1981, and knowing Jack Ruby, would you say that Jack Ruby knew several Dallas police officers?
Oh, many, many. He knew uniform officers, he knew command officers, and he would come in. He had an open door. He operated with the power of an officer,
Yes, sir.
and he was even known to carry a pistol all the time.
Yes, sir. I've
And
always
he
heard
used to
that.
carry brass knucks all the time.
Heard that several times.
And a lot of people around the city hall, the civilians and everything, because we all wore hats in those days.
I see you have one of your hats that you wore
This
back
is
in
an
the-
old hat I've had for 50 years
Yes, sir.
that one of the old assistant chiefs gave me. And we would always go covered when we were talking to the public or answering calls in plain clothes in those days.
Yes, sir.
And of course, uniform officers had caps.
Yes, sir.
They always wore their caps, but nowadays the police officers don't wear caps. They don't wear hats.
You don't see- you don't
The
see
style and culture has changed since then.
It has.
But Jack Ruby wore a little snap brim hat all the time, and a lot of the civilians around the police department thought he was a police officer.
Yes, sir.
And he'd walk right in the dispatcher's office. He'd go in any area. Of course, in those days we didn't have master locks at the doors. Everything was sort of an open door policy in those days.
Yes, sir.
And of course, we had certain procedures of security where we checked people out coming in and out, but no one checked Bob Jack Irby. And all the older officers would punch the new men and tell them who Jack Ruby was.
So that they would know who he
Don't
was.
bother him. He's okay.
Yes, sir.
And Jack would come in, and the day Oswald was shot, I was told many, many times that he was carrying fat envelopes. And a fat envelope, if you don't know or the viewers don't know, that's an envelope the size of a $100 bill. And you can put as many $100 bills in there as you want to, or you can put as many $50 bills in there, or $5 bills you want to. He was carrying about 7 fat envelopes the day he killed Oswald that he had not delivered yet. And he may have already delivered some that day to officers in the police department.
Yes, sir.
And he used to mark down the number on the envelope like 12, 26, 2, and that would be the officer or person, deputy chief, lieutenant, or sergeant that was taking the fat envelope to pay his rent with
Also, Rowe,
or to pay his car with.
when Ruby shot Oswald, in your opinion and to your knowledge of what you know yourself or you were told by fellow officers, do you believe Oswald or that Jack Ruby went down the ramp or that he came into another part of the building?
There's really no telling, since he had in most cases he knew all the patrol officers guarding all the entrances,
Certainly.
and he could have been in there for an hour or only 30 minutes. And of course there are a lot of accounts of people saying they saw him get out of a car and he was driving a car. I never did know Jack Ruby to even have a driver's license, and he had several cars, but he'd always have somebody else driving him.
Yes, sir. He did have 2 cars, I know that I found out. But you're right.
Because we used to take him home all the time, and he had several apartments all the time. He'd have apartments for his girlfriends, and he'd go over there sometime, and he'd go home. We used to take him home in the squad car, the marked police car, all the time, just like it was a cab.
Yes, sir.
He'd call us. He'd call us at home, and we'd go get him at the apartment and take him to the club.
Also, Rowe, let me ask you another question. In your opinion as a police officer, and I certainly value that because you had many, many years' experience in dealing with the public and dealing with the crimes. In your opinion, sir, do you believe that Oswald shot President Kennedy? Do you believe Oswald fired any shots that day, in your opinion?
Well, to all of what I've learned, I believe that he may more than likely fired the first shot.
The first shot.
Because they put him in that window up there and made certain he had a job in that building, to put him on the scene,
Somebody.
and he bought that rifle on a mail order terms, and he was put in there as a patsy to get caught, and it not necessarily was in the plan for Ruby to take care of him, but it worked out that way where they did have somebody to take him out.
Yes, sir.
So, but Oswald probably was thinking that he was the only one.
Yes, sir.
But in my opinion, there was 2 or more shooting,
2 or more gunmen at the time President Kennedy was killed.
2 or more.
Yes, sir. I share that opinion deeply with you, sir.
Because he had an old Italian rifle that was bolt action,
Yes, sir.
single load. In order to, if he already had one in, fired that first shot, then he had to open that bolt, and he had to put another one in to get those other 2 shots off.
Yes, sir.
And that takes a lot of time, and that car is moving.
Yes, sir.
That car is moving. And the time element didn't
Didn't match up.
match up
No, it sure did.
to me.
Now, Officer Rowe, do you believe that, that Oswald, Lee Harvey Oswald, shot Officer J.D. Tippit?
The pistol they caught him with that he pulled, and Officer McDonald grabbed, the ballistic shot. The ballistics test showed that the bullets, I think he shot Officer Tippit 4 times,
Yes, sir. He was shot 4 times.
3 or 4 times. And one of them that was found, the ballistics test went to the pistol.
That Oswald had at the time of his arrest.
And also with the old silver nitrate paraffin test on your hand, his right hand was shown to have fired a weapon recently. Now that could have been from the pistol or the rifle. However, the rifle showed, I don't know whether they did any testing on him or not,
Yes, it did. And none was
on
found
silver
on the
nitrate.
rifle, yeah.
But if you're using a rifle, the test is, the silver nitrate filter has to be done on the side of the face because you've got it up here also,
Yeah.
and the hand.
Yeah, that test was done on Oswald, according to several great researchers in the case.
But back then it wasn't too good, and still that's not going to tell you when it
When.
was fired.
Certainly.
Just recently,
Just recently.
in
Well,
the past.
Officer Rowe, in your years in Dallas, and we're going to wrap this up here pretty quick, but in your years in Dallas, sir, just before the assassination, during the assassination, right after, and then up till now, in your years in Dallas, do you think that the city of Dallas and the state of Texas has been just overmarred by this, and if so, what is your opinion as to what it done to the city of Dallas after the assassination?
As time goes by, this being coming up being the 45th year, there are a lot of people that are not here anymore.
Yes, sir.
Thousands and thousands of people are not here anymore. But the ones that have heard the stories about it, there are a lot of different opinions as to who might have been involved and who did it and everything, and there are a lot of conspiracy theories. But it still remains to be a center of interest downtown
Certainly.
all year long,
Every day.
because we have a 6th-floor museum in that very depository building that it retains the interest and keeps the interest in Dallas.
Yes,
And it was a historical factor, and there's something I wanted to remind you that maybe you've forgotten to ask me, but when I was watching television, when Jack Ruby stepped up there in the basement to kill Oswald,
I was going
to
ask you
fire
that.
that one shot, It was very noisy. Now, they had some television cameras there, and back then they weigh 150 pounds, and they were on big wheels this big around. And they did have some cameras and some microphones in there that day. And there were a lot of noise. And Jack Ruby climbed over that little barricade there in the parking lot, and he stepped up there and fired one shot. And there was a short moment of silence right after the shot. And a detective right over there in that area with his back up against the brick wall, Billy Combest, hollered, "Jack, you son of a bitch."
That's what he hollered.
And everybody could hear it on television, and it came out plain. And back in those days, son of a bitch was one of the bad words.
Yes, sir.
But now, if you ever hear the main live broadcast, you'll hear Billy Combest say, "Jack, you son of a bitch," in that moment of silence.
Yes, sir.
And I know Combest, he said it, but a lot of people, including the detectives, were right there close, thought it was Outlaw that said, "Jack, you son of a bitch."
Yes, sir. Well, I did. I have, like I said, one time, two occasions, met Billy Combest, and he certainly was standing right behind LaBelle. And what you just said, he did confirm, and I know that is very true. And he certainly was right there, as Officer. Another good friend of mine I've known many years, Roy Lowry, who was on the Dallas Police Department at the time. You see him in the photograph. Of course, Officer Graves and Officer Montgomery, they were all right there when Ruby shot Oswald. There's some, Officer Rowe, there's been many things about the assassination, the shooting of Officer Tippit, the shooting of Oswald, the death of Jack Ruby when he died. And in my opinion, in researching this, and of course being in Dealey Plaza as a young kid that day myself, and when you're a kid, I wasn't say too up to apt on the politics of the world at that time, but we went down to see the president that morning, as everybody else did, and that's the only way we were there. But as the years went by, say from the time I was 16 till now, I've researched the Kennedy assassination, talked to many witnesses who were there, some who are still living like yourself, talked to many police officers and got their opinions of it, FBI agents, Secret Service agents. I've talked to several. It seems that as you said a while ago, the interest is certainly still there to this very day. People come to Dealey Plaza, people go to the 6th floor museum where shots were fired from, and the 6th floor museum, of course, entertained a lot of people about the assassination every year. You had the Conspiracy Museum, which is no longer there, but it was there for several years. Down in Dealey Plaza, you have several guys who sell the little JFK programs or journals. Mr. Robert Rowe was certainly one of the two great researchers in the case, along with Mr. Josiah Thompson. Robert goes down on the weekend, sells his books, The Killing of a President, High Treason, The Search for Lee Harvey Oswald. But to me, Officer Rowe, it seems that for some reason, people have tried to distort several things that is true. I don't believe that everything the Warren Commission said was true, but at the same time, I believe many things that the Warren Commission said was true. I don't think that some things were done on purpose. I think there were some mistakes made in the Warren Commission investigation. Another thing that has been said over the years that has truly upset me, and I won't say this with you sitting here by my side, people have said over the years, and I know you've heard this, Officer Hargis and I have talked about it many times, Officer O.E. Stanton, Officer Dave Pye, Nolan Perry, I've talked all, that the Dallas Police Department was involved in the assassination of John Kennedy, and that really, it just pisses me off. I'm going to use those words, because that's exactly what it does. Well, you officers that I knew, and I know y'all didn't have a damn thing to do with this assassination of President Kennedy.
I've heard that a lot too, down through the years, and that's something that I disbelieve.
Yes,
that any
I agree now.
officer would have
I'm gonna go
anything
on
to do
tape.
with killing the president.
And this is me saying that it's not Officer Rowe. I'm saying it's Michael Brownlow. I'm the one interviewing Officer Rowe here today. I want to go on this interview and say this in the presence of someone who was part of the city at the time. I do believe there was one man who was a member of the Dallas Police Department that had prior knowledge to the assassination. I'll always believe that, and I think he had that knowledge because of Jack Ruby. And I think Jack Ruby had told him. I don't know if he could have stopped it or not, or if he was threatened, which I'm sure he probably was afterwards. But he was high in the Dallas Police Department, and I'm not talking about Chief Jesse Carey, but someone very close to him. I'm not going to call any names at this point in time. But I do believe that there was one person who was a member of the Dallas Police Department, one and one only, that had some prior knowledge to the assassination. And like I said, I don't think really, I really feel like if he had tried it, stopped it, I don't know if he would have continued to live afterwards. He did. I remember when he passed away, probably 20 years after the assassination. But I do believe this particular person had some knowledge. But for it, Officer Robert Rowe and Officer B.W. Hargis and Officer J.D. Mercer and Officer Nolan Perry, Tommy Hudson, these guys that I've known for many, many, many years, I've known them all, they didn't have a damn thing to do with the assassination of John Kennedy. And Officer Hargis put his life on the line in the plaza, and then of course Officer Rowe being as close as he was to the arrest of Oswald, and these men done their job that day to the best they could do it with what they had to work with. They didn't know who was involved and what had happened. So being here today with Officer Rowe has been a pleasure, and Officer Rowe, as I said at the beginning of this interview, he joined the police as a young man in the police department here in Dallas, and for 26 years he served his community. He did wear the badge with pride and dignity and respect and honor the way it should be. He's still living in the grace of God, and Officer Rowe is now in his mid-70s, but he's still amongst us. Pretty good health, gets around pretty good. We all have health problems, but thank God he's still with us. And Officer Rowe, Steve and I certainly want to thank you for this interview today.
I'd like to make this last comment.
Steve, you have any questions you'd like to add, Officer Rowe? Go ahead, Officer Rowe.
I've been, with the exception of 2 years, I've been going down there for nearly 3 days, standing around down there in certain spots. And I met these two gentlemen maybe 8 or 10 years ago.
Yes, sir, about 10 years ago.
And but I've been down there for 43 years anyway. On November the 21st, 22nd, 23rd, or 3 days, usually, and especially when it was falling on the 10th anniversary and the 20th and 30th and 40th anniversary.
Yes.
This year will be the 45th anniversary.
Yes, sir.
And we're expecting special programs down there.
Yes, sir.
And if any of you come into that area, in the Dealey Plaza area, 6th Museum area, Depository Building area, you can look up all three of us at any time. We'll usually be standing down there. Somebody will know where we are.
Yes, sir. And it's been a pleasure, Officer Rowe, and I tell you, it's people like yourself and Officer Hargis and Mary Mormon, who is still living, the lady that took the famous grassy knoll picture, Bill and Gail Newman. Steve and I interviewed them just a few months ago. Mr. and Miss Franson, who is still living, Gene Newman, who is still living. It's, these people and myself, and, we were there. And regardless as to what age you were, what color you were, where you were, everybody that was in Dealey Plaza that was there that day know what he or she saw and heard. Certainly if you was a young kid like myself, people will say, well, you was a young child. Well, that's true. But my grandmother and my aunt were there with me and several friends. And I will always say this, and I've always said it, and I'm going to continue to say it. I don't believe Lee Harvey Oswald fired any shots from that window. There's a great possibility that he did. And I say that because I don't know. But what I will say for a fact is this. Whether Oswald was shooting from that window or not, he might have been up there with his mother. Fine, let's say he was. The shot that came from the grassy knoll, or the shot that hit John Kennedy right here, came from the picket fence up on the grassy knoll. And that shot went back and hit Officer Hargis. The brain of President Kennedy hit Officer Hargis in his face, splattered him. And Miss Kennedy climbed out on the trunk and picked up a piece of brain and skull. And with that happening, that certainly proved that shot came from the front. And it was a sad and tragic day, and it's just something that we're never going to know the entire answer to. Officer Rowe, once again, we thank you, sir. Enjoy doing the interview with you.
You're welcome.
And we certainly appreciate your service to your community the years that you served, and glad to still have you around, and like myself, and I hope God continues to let us live in his grace and mercy. Thank you, sir.
Thank you.
Is September the 23rd, 2008, and I'm in a suburb of Dallas, Texas. And the lady sitting next to me is Miss Bennett, but on November the 22nd, 1963, she was known at that time as Miss Mary Sue Dickerson. And Miss Mary worked in the Texas School Book Depository building for a company called Allen Bacon Books. Publishers. And now you were a secretary or a treasurer? Or
I was office manager.
Office manager. And that was in 63.
Yes.
And Ms. Mary, what year did you go to work for that company?
I went to work May the 6th, 1963.
May the 6th, 1963. So you had worked there approximately 6 to 7 months at the time of all this happened. And the office that you worked in, Allen Bacon, was on the 4th floor?
3rd floor.
On the 3rd floor. Now you knew Mr. Stephen Wilson. Did you know Mr. Wilson?
He was my boss.
Yes, yes.
He was vice president.
I met Mr. Wilson in 1971.
You did?
Yes, and he didn't go outside that day. He was watching from the 3rd floor window. You can see him.
He didn't want to go down, and
Yeah.
I was in his office, and all the other women in the office were going down, and my friend Mary Wilson,
Mary Wilson, yeah.
came in there and said, "Mr. Wilson, aren't you going to let Sue go down?" And see, he didn't care anything about seeing the president.
That's what he told me.
And
He told me that.
he said, "Well, okay," because we were working, you know. And he said, "If you'll go get me a Coke before you go." And I dashed down those back stairs, which weren't supposed to use,
Yes, ma'am.
and got him a Coke, flew back up there, and went downstairs so I could see the president.
Yes, ma'am. Well, I want you to know something, Miss Mary. Mr. Wilson told me that very story.
He did.
In 71, and he told me, and he said, Mary went on down, and he said, I didn't go down. He said, I didn't really care for John Kennedy's politics.
I don't know.
And he said, I just didn't want to see him. He said, but I did decide to, he said, I heard all the noise and the clapping as the car came off Main Street. Mm-hmm. So he told me he walked up to the window, and in several of the pictures that were taken from outside, you can see the depository, you can see him standing in the window. He was on the 3rd floor. Well,
He was probably at my window because I think he could have seen it better from mine was just outside his office.
now, Miss Mary, as you went outside, how long would you say you had been standing outside before the president's car came into view, just in your
A
remembrance?
very short time. He came down Houston Street and then turned the corner,
Made the left.
and then
On
it was just a very short time.
Very short time. Now, Ms. Mary, one of the most critical things to the Kennedy assassination over the years, and people have really made a big to-do about it, I think the main thing is because many people have talked about the favoritism between the two men. Of course, as you know, Lee Harvey Oswald was accused of the assassination. He was arrested and then killed 2 days later by Jack Ruby. But there was a man who worked in the book depository at the same time you did. His name was William Nolan Lovelady. Everybody called him Billy Lovelady.
Billy
As a
Lovelady.
lot of people call people Billy for short for William. Now, did you know Mr. Lovelady?
I knew Billy Lovelady well.
Yes, ma'am.
Had known him ever since I'd been there.
And when you went to work there, Mr. Lovelady was already working there.
I believe so, yes.
I met 3 times that I met Mr. Lovelady. He told me that he had went to work there in '61.
Yeah.
Around Christmas of '61. So he had been
Yeah,
working
I
there
knew
about 2 years.
he was there when I went to work, as far as I remember.
Now, as you went downstairs and went out the front door, did you see Mr. Lovelady?
No, what I didn't go when I went down to go outside. I rode the elevator,
Yes, ma'am.
and when I went out, I don't remember who I saw.
Okay.
But I doubt if I saw, because they didn't let the people out of the depository very quickly. And some of them, like, I don't believe Geraldine, what's her name?
Geraldine Reed.
I don't even think she went out, did she?
Well, according
If
to her,
she did,
probably about the same time you did, but she stood in a different position
yeah.
across the street. Now, in the book 6 Seconds in Dallas, her statement on the day of the assassination, she said she was standing outside.
Who wrote that book?
Mr. Josiah Thompson. And he interviewed just as I'm doing you right now, he interviewed Miss Reed in 1965. He was one of the first, if not the first, to interview her. She was the manager of the,
Yeah,
the
depository.
depository. And
She was the office manager.
yes, ma'am. And he interviewed her in '65. And the reason her name was so emitted to it, a lot of people have said that she said she saw Oswald, or was actually talking to Oswald at the time the president was shot. Well, I met Miss Reed in 1972. She was still living. And she told me, she said,
Well, I was going to say, that's not true.
She said, I never said that.
That's why I asked you who that was, because, you know, I told you Mark Lane came up.
Yeah.
And
Well, that's reading Josiah. He came back later
Charlotte.
and he told him, he said, well, when I talked to Miss Reed in '65, she was outside. She never said she was in there talking to Oswald. And I interviewed Miss Reed in '72, and she told me, she said, Mike, I never made those statements.
See.
So there's been a lot of things said.
And you know, Mark Lane wrote in his book a bunch of stuff that, because he did interview Mr. Wilson, but he came into our office. He made the appointment through me under an assumed name, and I don't remember what the name was.
Yeah.
And I would have never known.
He used his first name, but it was a last name.
Except when he came in that day and I showed him into Mr. Wilson, Mary Wilson, who was the, Williams, who was the receptionist, called me over and she said, do you know who that was? And I said, well, I named the name he had told me. And she said, no, that's Mark Lane. I saw him on the Today Show this morning. And when his book came in, Mr. Wilson was so upset because he was so misquoted that he had me call the FBI and deny all of this. And the FBI person that I spoke with said, that's just a bunch of trash. We don't, tell him not to worry. We don't take any, it's their credence in there. And I think there have been too many books that have written that have not been accurate.
Mr. Wilson told me that when I met him in '71. He told me, and at that time I was quite a young boy myself at the time, but he told me, he said, Mike, he said, I never told Mark Lane those things. And he said, I don't know why Mark done that.
He was so upset.
He was still in '71, and he talked very, very bad about Mark Lane because.
Well, because a whole lot of people read the book and take
so
it.
that's why he told me. But he certainly treasured Josiah Thompson. He did do an interview with Josiah Thompson one time. And
Well,
Mr.
who is Thompson?
Mr. Josiah wrote a book called 6 Seconds in Dallas. And
But
he wrote-
is he someone that lives here? Or?
no, he lives in California, and
Oh,
he's 76 years old now. And he started researching the Kennedy assassination, Miss Mary, probably 2 weeks after it happened. And he talked to witnesses. He was talking to witnesses in '63, a little bit after it happened. So in '64, he started interviewing people, and he started writing the book. And as far as I know, till this day, Miss Mary, Josiah's book is the only book that has the master list of witnesses in it
Oh, it
from
does.
that time. And your name is in there as Mary
Yeah.
Sue Dickerson.
Dickerson.
And he said he never talked to you,
No.
but he had gotten your name from the reports and people that day.
I can't even remember some of the people that I
Yeah,
talked to.
exactly. And that's
This-
how
this
news media.
Hero
you
that
got your
came
name.
from Louisiana, you know, from Garrison's office. He came into the office sometime after that, and he said, you know, he wondered if he didn't, you know, he hadn't called for an appointment or anything, but he asked the receptionist, and she sent him to me, you know,
Yes, ma'am.
and
Now, Miss Mary, in your opinion, and working there at the book depository from May of '63, and now, did you continue to work there after the assassination a little while?
oh yeah,
And do you remember? I want something you can clear up today.
okay.
From the time of the assassination, November 22nd, '63, how much longer did you work there?
Well, I tell you, I worked for the same companies and the same depository, but I worked there until they moved to Brook Hollow. Now, I can't remember when that was, really. I can't remember what year that was, but the depository, the Texas depository moved to a different location, and it was over at Ambassador and Dividend
Oh,
in
North
Dallas.
Yes.
in
Now, would
Brook
you say
Hollow.
that would have been in the late '60s or early '70s?
Somewhere around that, I would say, probably late '60s or, you know, maybe early '70s. I just don't know. I remember Bob Hill was, see, Mr. Wilson had already retired. And Bob Hill was the manager at that time, and we moved out there, and I don't know what kind. It was a building that had been there, but the depository went in and made offices and everything. And I know we got to go in and lay out how we wanted ours, and Bob and I did that, you know, to lay out the offices, and we were the first on going into that building.
Now, you knew Miss Mary Williams.
Oh yes.
Did you ever know Miss Bonnie Ritchie
Oh yeah.
and Miss Pauline Sanders?
What was her name?
Pauline Sanders.
Yes.
These were ladies that worked in the book depository.
They worked
as
in the
you did.
depository.
Karen Westbrook, a lady named Miss Thornton, Betty Thornton. There were several. And I know it's been many years.
I know, but there were a lot of employees in the depository offices.
And that's why I wrote these different book companies down that were there, because some of them worked for different book companies. And I think
But a lot of people work just for the depository.
exactly, that's what I was going to say.
Under
So the book depository had employees that were different from Allen and Bacon.
because you know
Scotsman, Fordman.
the Texas School Book Depository is a service organization.
It was.
They furnished the offices for all the publishers that wanted to be there, because Texas has a law that if you have a contract with the state of Texas, you have to have a Texas shipping point. Now, some of the companies like Houghton Mifflin and a few others had their own shipping and, you know, offices and their shipping, but a lot of us just went with the depository, and the agreement was they furnished the offices, they did all the billing and shipping and warehoused, you know, ordered the stuff and everything we told them what to order. And they got a percentage of your sales.
Yes, ma'am.
That's how that worked. Now, most people don't have a clue that I told you this one that just interviewed me either this year or last year. And when the newspaper came out, the headline said, "Former Texas School Book Depository employee you know, says it's a bunch of, it's hogwash, which I never used the word hogwash in my life. That is not in my vocabulary. It's come into my vocabulary since I've denied this.
Certainly.
But, and I told the man that, but it's just hard. The concept is hard, and I know how that is because when I was interviewed, Mr. Wilson was talking about the depository, and I thought, what the heck is a depository, you know?
Yes, ma'am.
But of course, after you got in there, you knew what it was. But most of the publishers didn't have very many employees because it's a branch office of national offices. See, our home offices was in Boston,
Yeah.
and we had places all over the country. But Texas and California are the biggest book sellings of all over the country.
Of school texts.
School textbooks.
Yes, most definitely.
And so that's, we sold more books. California and Texas, you know, just, and see, our office served a 5-state area.
Yeah, New Mexico, Oklahoma, Texas, Arkansas, and Louisiana.
And actually, the next one, I worked for another company after that, and we had 6 states.
Now, Miss Mary, on the day of the assassination, that morning, and I'm just going to estimate, this is an estimation, I want to say they're doing them because I'm not saying it for a fact, I don't know.
Okay.
But I'm going to estimate about 11:30, which would be an hour before the assassination, because President Kennedy was killed at exactly 12:30.
He was killed when?
At 12:30. The big clock upon the book depository read 12:30, 66 degrees. And that's all film. When the president was shot, you were standing out on the surface between the book depository and Elm Street, right?
Right.
And you were probably 30 yards east to the big tree, the tree that is noted.
I don't remember how far I'd be,
Yeah,
but I was
to the
east.
left of the tree.
I was east of it.
East of the tree, right, as I'm saying.
And not very far from
From Houston.
Houston.
Right, so you were right kind of in the middle. So when the president's car made that left turn on the Elm Street,
They
you
were going
just
slowly.
very slowly. You were just a few feet away,
Yes,
and you saw the president.
I saw it.
And
He was
did you-
shot right in front of me.
Yeah, now I'm gonna let you tell you. So from that point, what did you see in your eyes? And
Well,
only somebody can tell that. is you.
Okay, I'm looking at the car as it comes down Houston Street,
Yes, ma'am.
and it's real exciting. We've been looking out the window all morning, and they've been, I don't know, policemen and FBI people, you know,
In the area.
everybody out there, you know, especially around the corner there. I mean, that's where I could see them.
Yes, ma'am.
And they were all out there. And see, I didn't know what time I went down there, but I didn't get down there very much sooner than he got shot.
Yes, ma'am. So you would say 2 to 3 minutes, maybe, or?
Oh, I think it's probably more than that, because they were coming slowly down toward us, you know, on Houston Street, and I could see that car over there. But you know, after I got there, so it was, you know,
It was already on Houston Street coming.
it was on Houston Street.
Okay.
As well, as far as I remember.
Well, that's what you remember. You were there. You know
Yeah.
you remember better
Because
than anybody else.
a whole lot of the things, just I was in such shock after
sure.
this happened that. But you know, there are just some things that I know, and I know that I pushed that man.
Yeah.
And then I went right back in, and I know people couldn't get back in if they didn't go in. And right after I got there, I went. I got on the elevator and went downstairs to the restroom.
So now after the headshot hit the president and the assassination, the actual shooting was over, you went back inside the book depository.
Yes.
You went back up the stairway.
No, I went on the elevator.
I mean, yeah, but from the street, when you ran back
I went
in,
to the building,
Yes.
through the front of the building,
to
and
the
went to the
front door,
elevator.
and then
went
went
up.
to the elevator, and you
Went
went
to
back
third.
up to the third floor where
Right.
Mr. Wilson was. Now, at that point in time, did you, or do you, if you certainly, and you wasn't thinking about him, you wouldn't have no reason to be, but do you remember seeing Mr. Lovelady at any point in time at that time?
Oh, I don't remember who I saw.
Yes, because
I went downstairs. I remember that. I came right out and got the elevator down to the second floor to go to the restroom. And when that door opened, there were men on either side with these humongous long guns that and I said, oh, or something.
now this was after the assassination.
Yes, I'd gone back into the building.
Yes, ma'am.
But they were already in there, and I don't know if they were Dallas policemen or what, but I
Were
just...
they in suits?
I
If they
didn't
wasn't in
see.
police uniform.
I don't remember. They might have been. They might have been. I don't know if they were FBI, but they had long guns,
Like rifles.
one on each side
Yeah.
of that. And I
that was
said,
on the second floor.
yeah. And see it happen, because I don't think I'd been up there very long at all until,
2 or 3 minutes.
I was so excited I needed to go to the bathroom.
Yes, ma'am.
And so I did that, and I walked around to go back to the restroom, and sure enough, there were others back there, but they were in, and they let me in and everything, and I thought, this is scary.
Yes, ma'am. I'm sure. Yes, I'm sure.
But what I was saying before about Oswald, he came in, and I know where that was. That's where I went, to the vending machine to get that Coke from Mr. Wilson
Yes,
on the
ma'am.
second floor.
On the second floor.
And Oswald was there, and Mr. Truly, said he's okay. He works here.
Now, when you went and got the Coke for
Yeah.
Mr.
Yeah,
Wilson,
that was before.
before the assassination, did you see Oswald at that time?
Oh, no.
You didn't see him at that point.
But I went down on the freight elevator, which I was not supposed to do.
Yeah, I've heard some other people say that the employees wasn't supposed to, but they did.
But,
they did use it.
It's the one, that they used to go.
So well, let me ask you this way then, Miss Mary, and this will probably be the best way you can answer. That morning, November 22nd, from the time you went to work up until the time the shots were fired and John Kennedy was killed, do you remember seeing Oswald at all?
No.
You don't remember seeing
But
him?
I don't remember who else I saw. I mean,
Yeah, and if you did, you don't
I
remember.
didn't, when I would go into the building, see, the depository was just, actually, we couldn't even get in it from there. Right there, as far as I know, I can't remember. But their door, was just different. I didn't ever go in the depository,
Yeah,
and I never went to the warehouse. I mean, probably very few times did I ever go to the warehouse.
Yes, ma'am. Now you say warehouse. That was a warehouse down the street,
Well, there was a warehouse in that building
In the
too.
building.
In the building.
and then they also had another one just
Yeah,
a few blocks
the
down.
state. They call that the State Department because it was all state adopted books there.
Certainly. And I'm
And that was,
where you out here. So we
But
don't-
there was
don't-
a warehouse where they kept some books
in the book depository.
in the and Mr. Shelley was over
Over there. Bill Shelley.
and you
I met Mr. Shelley in 1972. He lived in Irving, Texas. Went to his home probably 5 or 6 different occasions.
is he dead?
Mr. Shelley died. Oh, he's been dead several years. He died in 1993. Otis Campbell died. Mr. Campbell died in '89, and then Roy Truly died. I believe.
Now, I remember seeing it in the paper when Mr. Truly died,
believe
and I
90
think I remembered seeing Mr. Campbell.
Yeah, '92. Roy Truly, I think.
But
They were up in age. because
Mr.
they-
Campbell's first wife died, and then he remarried.
Yes, yeah,
He was a real gentleman.
yeah.
you know.
Otis Campbell. Yeah, I met all. And the reason I talked to him, of course, they were all three.
Oh yeah.
They had a little rank or were like foreman or manager or something. in
Of the
that nature.
depository. They
And
were
they
all
all three-
officers. Mr. Campbell was the
They
financial
all,
person.
He was, and they all three knew Oswald and had seen him.
Oh
talk.
sure. Roy probably hired him.
Yeah, he and Bill Shelley, yes. Now, and
Yeah,
I'm glad you
Bill,
said
I
that.
guess.
Now, do you remember on the month and 1 week that Oswald worked there, And that's exactly how long he worked there, a month and 1 week. Did you ever talk to Lee Harvey Oswald that you remember?
No.
You don't remember?
I don't believe I ever talked to him.
But you did see him.
Because, yes,
Good.
but I never talked to him because I would say the majority of the men that worked in the warehouse, I never did talk. I talked to, Bill Shelley, and, and there was this Melvin. Did you know who Melvin was?
Melvin. The black guy?
Uh-huh.
Yeah. His name was Melvin, oh God, his name was Melvin.
I can't remember his last name, but he was a sweetheart.
Melvin Harris. Yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
He came to our office. I can't remember somehow. I saw Melvin a lot. He would do stuff.
Died 4 years ago.
He did. Well, he was just the nicest guy, and and there were people like this that I don't remember, but there were some that would come into our office, when I'd need somebody to do something.
Miss Mary, do you remember the janitor? The cleanup man, the janitor.
What was his name?
Well, there was two of them. One of them's name was Tom Fields.
Tom who?
Fields. And he was a white gentleman at the time, and elder at that time even. And Mr. Fields died in 1978, so he's been dead quite a few years.
Well, see, I don't think I knew him.
Then there was another one.
Because they didn't come into our offices until we were gone, I guess.
Yeah, they would be there in the building, but they would, you're right, and they'd clean up afterwards.
Yeah.
But they would be there in case they needed something happen or somewhere. And then there was another janitor who was a young black gentleman. Now his name was Willie Hawkins. Did you know him? And he was heavy set. He was a big guy.
No, I don't believe I knew anybody that was
You never knew neither one of them.
janitors. Because see, I wouldn't have had any
Maintenance men. People say janitor. Maintenance men.
maintenance people, but unless they had occasion to come up, and
Yeah, they were there.
it's like
in the fields of if a pipeline is busted in the building, they knew how to cut the water off with
Yeah.
the valves and things like this.
but that didn't happen in our, up on the third floor.
So you didn't know neither one of those men.
No, it's not that I might not, I don't have any
Yeah, certainly.
recollection.
Because you weren't
Because,
friends with them. If you did see them, they just
Basically,
didn't work
they
with
may have worked different hours, or did they work?
No,
were
they came in, I
closed
think,
10?
mainly 7, 8 in the morning, and were there till, I guess, 4 in the evening, 4:30, whatever time the normal hours were. And they were normal employees. Now, did you know Bonnie Ray Williams?
Who?
Bonnie Ray Williams, or Harold Norman, and James Jarman. They were 3 black men.
Okay, I remember James Jarman.
James Jarman, yeah.
I'm trying to place those. I think I probably knew those people. What did they?
They were book employees.
Yeah, they were.
And they were the 3 black men that were on the 5th floor. They were standing right under the window as shots began to ring out. They said they heard the shots, the shells hitting the floor on top of them. But you did know Mr. Jarman.
Well, I probably knew them all 3.
Yeah, they're all 3 dead.
But see, how many of us are left that were in the building?
And that's why I'm asking these questions. And the reasoning, the point I'm getting to, and I'm going back, and like you said earlier, Mr. Lovelady was working there when you went to work there. Now, to the best of your remembrance of seeing Lee Harvey Oswald, and I want you to picture it in your mind to the best you can now. If you can't, that's fine. Just guessing right now, Miss Mary, about how tall would you say Oswald would have been in your memory? Just guessing.
I don't know, but I know that I can compare the two, and they had a different build.
That's what I'm getting to.
They had a different build. Billy was pleasantly plump.
Thank you.
But not, not obese, but he was pleasantly plump, and he had a full face and everything. Oswald was thinner and slender, very, completely different.
So sitting here today, Miss Mary, and living God's life and still breathing God's air,
Yeah.
You can look me in the face, and I know this is true. You can actually say that Billy Lovelady and Lee Harvey Oswald were two totally different people.
Oh, in every way.
In every way. And,
But,
and Mr. Lovelady was working there when you went to work
Oh,
there.
yeah. But Billy was, he was, you know.
Well, let me tell you, I met Billy Lovelady in 1972. Now, you know, Mr. Lovelady died in 79.
Well, and see, 72, that was several years after the.
Yes. And he had moved to Denver, Colorado. And he died in Denver, Colorado.
Well, was he slender when you saw
No,
him?
he still weighed, Mr. Lovelady weighed 225. And you're right.
And I would
Now,
assume
he and
that.
Oswald were about the
He was a
same height.
nice looking guy,
Yeah.
and
But-
yeah, they probably were
Same
about,
height. But he was 225, 230.
yeah. And
After
I
a
bet
while.
Oswald didn't weigh 160.
If that much, that would have
Yeah,
been top.
that'd be the top.
Yeah,
He was thin,
yeah, he was.
and he had a
And,
thin face.
Mr. Lovelady.
I mean, how anybody in the
When I
world?
talked to Billy Lovelady the first time, he had come. It was in '72, and he had come home for Thanksgiving, and his family was still
Oh,
in Dallas.
really?
He had moved to Denver, and when I first met him and I talked to him, but he wouldn't do an interview. He had done some interviews, but then he said he started, even in the late '60s and early '70s, he started receiving threats. And of course, now you know Mr. Lovelady was arrested on the day of the assassination because of the face favoritism.
He was.
Oh yes, there's pictures
I
where
didn't remember that. I know.
yeah, he was arrested because he and Oswald favored in the face only. And of course, they both had the kind of receding hairline.
Yeah, but their head was completely different.
Completely
you know,
different.
I mean,
And that's what he was
their
telling them that
looks.
day. And their looks, and he had a fuller face. His face
Yeah, he
was
had a
fat.
full face.
Yeah,
Nice looking guy,
and he told me, he said,
and a
when they
regular looking guy. And Oswald was.
he said when they put the cuffs on him, he couldn't believe it, and he said they told him, they said, you're under arrest, but you're just going in for questioning. He never went to a cell, and he was sitting there still in handcuffs when they brought Lee Harvey Oswald in from Oak Cliff,
Really?
and Lee Harvey Oswald walked right by him,
Is that right?
and he told him, he said, now that's the guy that works with me down at the, so his name is Lee, and one of the detectives said, yeah, we know that, and and that's what the picture there's a picture of it. Mr. Lovelady is sitting down in the chair, Oswald is standing up. And as they passed with Oswald, one of the photographers took a picture. And that picture's well publicized. And right after that, one of the detectives, I believe his name was Holloman, he told Billy Lovelady, he said, now that's who they're mistaking you for. He said, y'all do kind of favor in the face a little bit. But he's a stand-up, and he said the guy took the cuffs off of him. He's called, you're definitely not him, because of the weight.
Well, this man from Alabama that I talked to Friday.
Yeah, his name is Jim Douglas.
Jim
I talked
Douglas.
to him probably the
Well,
week
he
before
kept
you did.
questioning me about how I knew that was Billy. But, you know, I told him, I said, well, no, it's true I didn't see him there, but I saw the picture.
Certainly.
But he kept asking me, you know, I don't think he believed me.
Well, and I know that, I'm doing this interview with you. This
Yes.
is my interview,
Yeah.
and I want to go on this interview sitting here with Miss Dickerson saying, Mr. Douglas seemed like a very nice guy. I met him twice in the plaza.
You did.
And he just recently wrote a book. I don't even know the name of it. I know it's
Yeah.
about the Lovelady thing, or it's called The Man in the Doorway or something of this nature.
He told
But
me.
his cause, the book that he's writing, and I'm going on record and say this, and if Mr. Douglas doesn't like it, he can certainly contact me. I don't have anything to hide from anybody. The man that was standing on those doorsteps was Billy Lovelady. It was not Lee Harvey Oswald. And a brand new baby can see the man in that doorway waiting.
Anyone that had seen both the people
Yes, would know.
would know that.
So I don't know what his purpose is, but you know, like I say, he seems like a very nice guy. I think he's written a book and he doesn't want to retract and tell the truth. And it seems that's what I'm getting from this, because I talked with him on the phone. Oh God, I think you said you stayed on the phone with him quite some time, and I stayed on the phone with him almost 2 hours. And he was asking just basically the same thing over and over in
I was
different
going to
ways.
say here, it's like, hello,
Yeah.
you know, we've already covered
How
that.
many times?
But, you know, on the way home, that day, you know, they wouldn't let us out. And when they finally did let us out, I had to go pick up my little boy, who was 2 at the time. Now,
I'm glad you mentioned that, Miss Mary, because I want to ask you a question about that. When you went back in the building, were you in the building, or do you remember being in the building when they say blocked it off? You know, where they wouldn't let anybody in or out? Did you just say?
I was, obviously it wasn't blocked when I went back
No,
in,
no.
or I couldn't have gotten
Couldn't
in.
have gotten in.
And so I don't know, but I don't think it was long. Apparently, if you just didn't come right back in.
Yeah, you weren't gonna get in.
But I didn't hardly know what I was doing. I just pushed that man out of the way and went on up there, and of course, feel guilty all my life for pushing
Do
somebody.
you remember when they said I guess it was Bill Shelley or Roy Truly, he went up to one of the policemen there inside the building and said, "I have an employee missing." Do you remember that?
No.
Yeah. Well, this is what I'm speaking of, is when they discovered that Oswald was gone. He wasn't inside. Now, some of the employees were still outside.
Well, I thought that they came up and Mr. Truly saw him there on the second floor.
He did, yeah, right after the assassination with the
And-
policeman, with Baker.
And then he went
That-
missing.
But about 30 minutes later, yeah, exactly, and that's when they got the work
I felt
employees.
so sorry for Roy
Yeah. But
because he
was in a
said that.
predicament.
But anybody would have.
Yeah, he did work there. He said he works here, and he did.
Yeah.
Yeah, he wasn't lying.
No.
And at that point in time, Mr. Truly wouldn't have had any point of knowing who was shooting from the window, because when he ran inside with the officer, he was just as innocent as anybody else. He didn't know.
Yeah.
And so when Officer Baker asked Mr. Truly, "Does this man work here, or is he an employee?" He told him, "Yes, he is one of my employees." And this happened in the lunchroom. Did you know Victoria Adams? Miss Victoria Adams, or Miss Sandra Stiles?
I don't. If you told me which publisher they worked for, I might.
Miss Stiles worked for Scott
Forsman.
and Miss Adams worked for Macmillan. Karen Westbrook also worked for Scott Forsman. And
Now Elizabeth Shoup.
Miss Shoup.
She was with
Miss Shoup.
McGraw.
Yeah, and she had went out and was standing outside.
She was.
Yes. She and a lady named, oh God.
See, Elizabeth
so
Shoup
many.
was the office manager of.
Miss,
company.
I tell you who she was out there with. I don't know if you knew. Miss Sarah Stanton and Miss,
I basically didn't know.
yeah, Judy. There was a lady, Judy. There was so many ladies that went out and stood
Yeah.
there. Miss Kunas, and then some of them that I named earlier. Bonnie Ritchie.
Yeah. Now Bonnie, I knew because she was.
As far as I know, Miss Ritchie's still living. As far as I know.
She's
think
beautiful.
y'all about the same
Did
age.
you
Oh, yeah.
interview her?
Oh yeah, yeah.
She's a beautiful
That's-
woman.
She was.
Very
She
beautiful.
was.
She got fired though.
Yeah, she did. And
I about fell over. I'd gone out to lunch.
well, and then she received some threats too. She told me she was threatened several times.
Really?
Mm-hmm. Well, here's what Miss Ritchie always has told me. Now, as far as I know, she still lives in the Houston area.
Where she lived?
In the Houston area.
See, I
Close
didn't
to
know
Houston.
what
She left and
happened to her.
well, she left here and went to California,
She did.
and then she came back.
Well, did
to
she
Dallas.
divorce that second
Divorced
husband?
us, yeah. And then when she stayed in California about 12, 13 years, while she was there, she met another guy, and they married out there, and then they came back to Texas.
Is she still married to him?
And
I
as far
hope.
as I know, they are. And they stayed here about another 2 years, and then they
Went
went
to
to the
his-
Houston area.
Oh.
And as far as I know, she's still living. You and her basically run the same age. She's right in that.
As who?
She might be 73, maybe.
Oh, I didn't
74.
know she was as old as me.
not
No.
quite, almost, yeah, she's in her 70s. Because she was 20, she told me, she was 28 or maybe 29 at the time of the assassination.
Yeah, see, I wasn't that old either.
No,
Because that's
that's what I'm
why
saying.
when that woman that wouldn't tell her age, you know,
yeah.
when we went out, she worked for Macmillan, and she was just sitting there, and her name was Doris Burns.
Doris Burns. Miss Doris
But
Burns.
did you know, and they
Doris
took
Burns.
each publisher, and when it got our turn, we went down there, and Doris was sitting there, and I knew they'd already gone through it. And so when the man started asking me all, you know, my
Miss
information,
Burns was standing outside.
but when I saw her, she was sitting there, and
Yeah.
I said, well, what have you got Doris out there for? She didn't do anything. And he said she wouldn't tell us her age.
Yeah.
Now,
At the time of the assassination, she was standing down a little further than you were. She was on down closer to the Stemmons
yeah,
freeway
close
sign.
to the underpass.
Yeah, she was. With several, well, Bonnie Richard was in that group too.
Uh-huh.
Yeah, Doris Burns, and she told me, now, have you stayed in contact with her?
Oh, no. I've never seen her since that day. Well,
Oh,
no,
yeah.
I guess I saw her after.
A few times
but-
after, maybe.
Sure, in the building, but
She lived in Garland for a number of years.
she must have either been a widow or.
No, she was married and had 2 daughters.
She did.
Yeah, and then
See, I never did
when
really
she
know
moved from
anything about her.
Garland,
To me, she was just an old lady.
she
that
moved
time,
to-
she must have been-
She's older. If she's she's older than you.
Well, I know it. See,
if
to me,
she's
she was
living-
an old lady.
If
and
she's living, she would be about probably 80,
yeah,
81. She's 4 or 5 years older than you.
yeah.
She was
She
born in
seemed older
Guthrie,
than me.
Oklahoma. That's where she was born.
really?
That's where she was from. Oh, I met her and talked with her. I tell you, Miss Mary, I'm not gonna hold you much long. When I was talking to all these people back in the early '70s, mainly in the early '70s, being black didn't help any at that time. You know, I'm just telling it the way it was. There was prejudice. There's prejudice now, and they weren't going to listen to anybody black, and you were discarded. It's very true. I remember one time I was in the plaza, and this was in '73, and I was down there with Miss Sitzman, the lady that was standing on the pedestal with Mrs. Zapruder, Marilyn Sitzman. And of course, she lived here in Duncanville for years.
Oh, really?
Miss
What's her name?
Marilyn Sitzman. You know, she's the lady that was standing on the pedestal with Mr. Abraham Zapruder. You know Mr. Zapruder, the man that filmed the Zapruder
Yeah,
video?
but I didn't remember much
She
about
stood
that.
up there with him. And I was in the
Did she
plaza.
work in the depository at
She
that time?
did. No, she worked for Mr. Zapruder.
Oh, she did.
Across the street over at the Daltex building.
Mm-hmm.
And I was down there with her, and this was in 1973 or 4. I believe it was 74. And we went down there, and I was asking her some questions about the picket fence. And while we were standing there talking, until this day, and even the same thing that goes on today, 2 men came up to us and made Miss Sitzman leave. Her brother was with her, and her niece. And they turned me around, searched me, said they were police officers, Dallas police officers, put me up against the wall up there. And after Miss Sitzman and her brother and niece left, they told me, they said, we're going to tell you something, we're going to tell you this one time. You're not going to come back down here and talk to anybody else or anybody that was here on the day of the assassination. And I told them, I said, well, you might well pull your pistol out now and kill me, because I'll be here tomorrow. And I'm still going down there to this very day. Well, I went through a lot of that. And,
Really?
and just like that happened to me, this is why so many people, Miss Burns, she would, with a researcher or somebody that just does interviews with people, oh, not her. She was scared. Many people, Bonnie Ritchie, she did talk to a few people, but after so many years, and then another thing, Miss Mary, and I'm sure you may already know this, a lot of these people left Dallas. They were scared. Because the Kennedy assassination, there was a lot of strange deaths came up afterwards. Some of the critical witnesses, however, like yourself, many people that were there that day are still living.
Yeah.
And these people were there they went out to see the president, just like people that had come down
Yeah,
from
sure.
other towns.
Oh, I have met a lot of people that, you know, didn't work there.
Yeah.
But who saw, you know, the
They were
parade
there.
at one
At
place
one
or
point or
another,
another,
because
yeah.
so many people just came out.
Exactly.
And some of them saw him land at La Field and
Yes.
came on out.
And,
But,
and being in Dallas all my life, I was able to talk to all these people. And there have been people there are people that are living that were in Dealey Plaza when it happened that have never been interviewed by the FBI, the Warren Commission. I know 3 people right now, and all 3 of them are in their 70s. And they're all still living. They were in Dealey Plaza when the president was killed. They were not interviewed on the day of the assassination. They have never been interviewed.
and worked in the building?
One of them worked in the building.
Well, I was, the Dallas Police and the FBI was at my door the next morning.
Next morning. Yeah.
And I lived in Oak Cliff.
Yeah.
And they asked me, because I remember telling him that I thought it was firecrackers.
Yes, ma'am.
Because, you know, not long before that, they had that
Now,
fiasco
so for them
with
to be
that.
at your door the next morning, did you give them your name the day of the assassination?
Oh, see, that's right, because you had to give all that
So
information.
that's how they knew. Yeah.
But if you didn't go back in the building, see, they wouldn't have necessarily had your name.
That's right.
But I went back in the building
So
and
if you
learned.
had went back in the building, you might not
Yeah.
even gave your name.
And
They
so
may
they
not-
wouldn't have any way to
Yeah.
know that you were a
That's
witness.
right, and that
But
makes all
then
the
when the
sense in
Warren
world.
Commission people came, they were very, very thorough.
Yeah. Now, did you talk to the Warren Commission people?
Oh, yes,
Yes.
twice.
Yes, ma'am.
You see, he came and he asked all us, and when he got to the question of age, I told him, and I said, you know, there was one woman who would not tell her age.
Yeah.
And he said, I know, I got her.
But did you tell them your age?
Oh, sure.
Yeah, I thought
I tell my age all the time.
Yeah, you did.
I'm
Yeah.
just like Minnie Pearl. I'm just glad to still be here.
Yes, ma'am.
But what he did, he was very, very thorough and listened, and then took it back, had it typed up, brought it back for you to read and make any corrections. And so when he did that, well, I remember in the first interview, I said, well, where were you when the president was shot?
You asked him that.
I asked a whole lot of those people.
Where were you?
They'd be asking me, and
Were
I'd
you
say,
there?
where were you?
There you go.
And one of the FBI men said, well, I was down at Tyler. And I said, everybody I've talked to, no wonder the poor man got shot. All you guys were out having lunch.
I bet he looked real funny when you said
Oh,
that.
no, they just like, but you had to have a little bit of levity. You know, you just couldn't.
Can you remember that man? The FBI man? Do you
No.
remember his name?
I don't. I met just
Now, when you were interviewed by the FBI and the Warren Commission, was that up on Irvay?
no, they came to my office.
Oh, they came to the office.
They
I know
came to my
interviewed some
office.
people of the
They-
Irvay FBI. office.
The
So they came to the book department.
The FBI came to me at home, you know.
Ah.
But the Warren Commission came there, and he came back, and he let me read my statement and make any corrections, and there were no corrections to be made. But I appreciated the fact that they did that.
Yes.
But
Did you sign it then?
oh yeah,
Yeah.
They told some people that they didn't have to sign it.
Yeah, some people, they told them they didn't even have to sign it. They really did.
well, I don't know that I would have had to, but I didn't have any
Did
reason.
they give you a copy of that? Did you ever
No,
receive a copy?
I didn't want a copy.
They asked them if you want a copy, we'll give you one. Some people said, well,
I didn't. But I remember telling that man that interview I said, you know, there was one woman that wouldn't tell her age.
Yeah, Ms.
And he
Brown.
said, I know, I got her. And so when he left that second time, I said, did she ever give you her age? And he said, yeah, but she made me promise not to tell it. When he started leaving, I said, I'm going to tell Doris you told me her age. And he said, oh,
Ms. Mary,
please.
in your remembrance, when President Kennedy was shot, just to your remembrance only,
Mm-hmm.
how many shots did you hear?
I think there were 3 shots.
3 shots.
But they were they're simultaneous. It was just bang, bang, bang. That's what I
Pretty
heard.
close together.
Real close together. It all just happened, you know, just as fast as it could.
In your opinion, as an,
Now that's my memory,
yes, ma'am.
which is not.
As a human being and a female and being American like myself and Brother Steve in your opinion, I asked everybody this. This is just an opinion, or it's in your opinion that you believe that Oswald did shoot the president, right?
I'm absolutely certain that he was, and I noticed Barefoot Sanders felt the same way. He just died, you know.
Yeah, not too long ago. Yeah, he did.
Well, he just a few days ago. I think his funeral's tomorrow.
Yeah, I think it was Thursday, last Thursday.
One day. Mm-hmm.
Well, I have always,
I just feel certain. I saw the stack of Scott Forsman Think and Do books up there. I went up there. I saw his paper bag with. You could tell it was lunch because it had a little oily looking on the paper bag laying down beside it.
This was the day of the assassination.
I'm not sure if it was that day or the next day that I came in. Now I know it was right after it, but I doubt if it was that day because we went, you know, we were there and kind of out of our
Some
heads.
people told me that they had to go down there the next morning, that Saturday morning, said that they went down to
the next day was Saturday morning, and the FBI and the police came out and interviewed me at home. So
they came out to your house that Saturday.
yeah, it was the day after the
Miss
assassination.
Ritchie told me that they called her.
Well, see, she was in the depository, so
Yeah.
I imagine the depository people.
She said they called her and she was
Oh, they
home,
called her.
and her brother went down there with her.
Oh, really?
And they asked her because she said she didn't get out until about 10:30, and they were there waiting on her. And she did work in the depository office.
Yeah, she worked for the depository,
Yeah.
you know, and we all worked in that building. But
They showed her the picture of Oswald that they had taken that night, and she told them. She said, "Yeah, I've seen him." She said,
Yeah.
"I know his name is Lee."
she wouldn't have had much contact
That's
with him.
what she said. She said, and they asked her. They said, "Well, do you think he shot the president?" She said, "Well, sir, I wouldn't know that." She said, "I don't know if he did or not." She said, "Because I didn't have that much contact with him." She said, "I've seen him in the building." She said, "I know he had," she said, "See, maybe he's worked here a pretty short period of time." I think she had been working there 2 years at the time, I think. If I'm not mistaken, is what she told me.
I don't know. She was working there when I went to work.
Yeah, oh yeah, she went to work there in 60 or 61, she told me. And she told him, she said, "I remember seeing him when he started working here." And she also said this, and maybe you can attest to this, she said sometime, she said, you know, as us working in the offices, she said if we had a reason to or some reason,
Yeah.
we may have went out in the warehouse
Yeah, that's right.
for whatever reason. She said, you know, we
But
got
not,
there.
not much. You
Right,
know, that's the
what
way
she
I
told me.
was.
And she said,
And I don't think I ever went down to the state warehouse.
and they asked her about Billy Lovelady and Oswald.
Well, she knew Billy, I'm sure.
And she told him,
Everybody in
Billy's
that-
been working here for almost a year and a half, 2 years.
Well,
And,
and Billy was a friendly, cooperative person, and
That's what she
everybody
said.
liked him.
That's what she
You know, everyone liked him.
And she told him, she said, well,
That's
I can tell you
reason-
one thing. She said, if they trying to compare them, she said, go,
Well, there would have been a bunch of us that would have gone down and shot people if
yeah,
they'd,
yeah.
if
She
they'd
said, well,
arrested
that man
him.
weighs over 200 pounds. She said, he's fat and pudgy. And she said, Lee.
I didn't realize that he weighed that much, but
Yeah, he did.
but I knew.
He had some pretty big arms too, Billy Lovelady.
See, he was probably solid,
Yeah.
you know, and
He had some big
everything.
arms.
But I knew. I mean, and Oswald, the one time I saw him, he was slight. He was, you know, just a slight built person, you know, just.
Well, Miss Mary, I want to tell you this so you'll know this for the cause of history, and it's something that you can surely check out to this very day. I don't know if you've ever, since that day, I don't know how deep you've gotten in. Now, Bill Pulte, who's married to your cousin, Miss Kathleen, Bill and I have done a lot of research on the Kennedy assassination together. Bill's
I
been
remember
with
him
SMU
telling me he had-
36 years at SMU, and oh yeah, we many years.
How did you get to know Bill?
I met Bill on the grassy knoll.
Oh, you
in
did.
1974. It was the 11th anniversary.
Oh, really?
Yes, and he was interviewing and talking to people then as I was. And we've known each other ever since, just like me and Steve. And we've been into this for the cause of truth, and to let people telling their own story like Steve and I have done you today. We just interviewed a Dallas police officer before we got here to your house, who was at the shooting of, at the arrest of Oswald at the Texas Theater. He was one of the arresting officers, and we interviewed him today as well.
Mm-hmm.
And we've interviewed several people, and we just try to let people tell stories, especially being 45 years later and still living at such a tragic event, whatever this story is. But I want to tell you this, Miss Mary, so you'll know this. Now, I might ask you to take this for a fact, because I'm not trying to change your mind. I don't do this with anybody. But I do want to say this, and I try to tell people, and then you can check out the records. Now, I know everybody's heard the Warren Commission and read it. I know that the Warren Commission said that Oswald shot President Kennedy. I'm not saying that he didn't fire from the window. I don't know. But I'm going to say it like this. Whether Oswald was shooting from the window or not, and he very well may have, he could have fired two
No,
or three shots.
I don't see how anybody could not think he shot from the window.
But, well, I'm going to tell you why, just what I was finna tell you. We talked about Geraldine Reed, and we talked about Bonnie Ritchie. Miss Sandra Stiles and Miss Dolores Reed both told me this, and a lady named Miss Adams. Now, as far as I know, Dolores Reed is still living, as far as I know.
No, I don't think she is.
She might, and I said, you took it out of my mouth, and if she is dead, she may have been dead maybe 5 years, because I talked with her 5 years ago. I know Geraldine Reed is.
I'm not positive, but I was thinking I had seen. See, I look at the obituaries.
Certainly. Oh, yeah.
Be sure I'm not
And
listed.
you could be right. But Miss Dolores Reed always told me this, and Miss Mary, I don't know if y'all ever talked about it together or nothing.
Geraldine Reed was which one was the office manager?
Geraldine.
She's the only
And
one I
Miss
knew. I
Reed,
didn't
she
know.
was a treasurer, like a secretary.
Yeah.
Dolores. And she always told this, and she told the Warren Commission this, she told the FBI, and she told the Dallas police.
What?
She said, I'm gonna tell y'all something. She said, I did not like Lee Harvey Oswald. She said he had a very morbid attitude. And her very words, I can't repeat what she said, I won't repeat what she said about it. And she said, I really kind of feared him. His attitude, she said, he always seemed real tight or real, like he was on the defense. She said, but I'm not gonna lie on him. She said, when I heard that first shot, she said, I looked over toward the coke box in the second floor, snack
she
room,
saw him?
lunchroom, and she said, I gave him the change to get the coke out of the coke box. She said, when I heard that first shot, she said, I looked at Lee. She said, and I said, Lee, sound like somebody's shooting a gun. She said, Oswald looked at her, he didn't say a word to her. Now I tell you, Miss Mary, I believe Oswald knew the whole thing. I believe
What do you think?
he was involved, and he could have fired some shots. I'm not saying, but here's what I'm going to tell you. The shot that hit President Kennedy right here and blew out the back of his head came from that grassy knoll. I don't know who fired it, and we'll never know.
Well, that could have been true, but
And I believe shots also came from the window.
what about? Did you interview the boy that he rode to work with that day?
Yeah, Bill Frazier. Yeah, he lived in Louisville.
And what did he say?
He said he had a package.
He had the long package
Yes,
and
ma'am.
said it was curtain rods.
He told him it was curtain rod. Yeah.
Right.
Mr. Frazier tells that story to this day. And I believe him. I believe he's telling the truth.
Well, I do too.
To what he knows.
He wouldn't have had any
Yeah,
reason.
and you know, Oswald, see, his wife, Marina, lived right up the street from Mr. Frazier's sister.
Yeah.
Where that's how they met. And he'd give him a ride to work, I think, 6 or 7 times. Yeah, and Mr. Frazier, I think, is telling the truth, and he talked about Billy Lovelady. Now, Mr. Frazier hadn't been working there too long.
He had.
No, but he's still living, and he's in moderately good health. Oh yeah.
I don't remember.
He's
I
a real
don't
nice
remember
guy.
him. Well, this could be true, but I just felt, I just know what I heard.
Oh, certainly.
And I don't see how somebody could have been standing there and shot right behind me and somebody else not seen him and jumped on him or something.
Yeah, I had trouble with that too, just like up on the knoll, and our people make their point.
See,
I know what you're saying.
And because there were a lot of people around there, and you couldn't all get up where I was, to be right on the,
And I'm glad you said today on this interview that you ran back in the building, because a lot of people have said, oh, they stayed right out there. And I said, no, they didn't. I said, some people ran back in the building.
yeah, and I didn't pay attention to what anybody else was doing, even people that were in our office.
Well,
I
Miss
just,
Mary, for the second time, I've enjoyed this interview with you, and
to get out. The people who did not immediately go back into the building were not allowed back into the building. Now, I don't know the time frame of when it was, they stopped letting them in. I know I went pretty immediately and went on to my office on the 3rd floor. Now, we were not allowed to leave until later they started letting different publishers go, and then they'd get the identification and videotape them and get all their vital information. And I'm not positive what time we left. I don't think we got to leave before maybe 2:30, and that's what I was telling Mr. Douglas, but he kept asking me over and over, how did you
So
know
you
it?
didn't, while you were outside, you didn't have a chance to look in the doorway and see if Mr.
No, I didn't
Rowe was
ever
there.
think about turning around
But
behind me.
later on, you saw a picture,
Yes, I saw a picture.
and you knew them both very well.
Plus,
so
I
you-
talked to people there, because people in depository were outraged that they were, you know,
Okay.
that they had mistaken Billy Lovelady for Lee Harvey Oswald.
yes, just
just
outraged,
wondered that.
because anybody that knew Billy Lovelady knew that he wouldn't ever shoot anybody, let alone the president.
And again, Miss Mary, you can also state even today that you know for a fact that Billy Lovelady and Lee Harvey Oswald were two different people.
Yeah,
Yeah,
absolutely.
yeah. So,
They were just two different people.
yeah. And that's well, Miss Mary.
But
we
people would rather believe a conspiracy than they had the truth.
Yeah, some people, but I think, Miss Mary, people that were there, like you and myself, because I was a young boy,
Yeah. Where were you?
we were standing over there on the right across the street from you.
Yeah.
Of course, we wouldn't have known each other at that time. There were several kids there at that time with their parents.
Yeah.
I tell you, Miss Mary,
We have 3 minutes.
yeah, I'm finna sum it up right now. I think on that date, I'm gonna get you some material from the day of the assassination. This will be from the, Mr. Sam Holland, a man named Sam Holland. He was on the bridge over on the railroad, along with several other railroad workers and 3 Dallas police. And I want you, and we'll give them to you, and it's because you did the interview with us. And Bill, when you get a chance, I want you to talk to Bill before you leave this world, or I leave this one. Because Bill has done, he'll tell you, I don't know, maybe y'all have talked about it since y'all are kind of kin through marriage.
I don't remember that we've discussed it much.
Yeah, I would have to say, and I don't use the word conspiracy. I use the word that it was a setup for many reasons. I don't think it happened the way the Warren Commission said. I'm not saying the Warren Commission is totally lying either. And I think Oswald did know, and I think he knew the whole thing. He was involved from day one. I tell you something else, Miss Mary. A lot
You
of people.
think he knew what?
I knew. No, I'm going to tell you. Jack Ruby,
Yeah.
Lee Harvey Oswald, and J.D. Tippit, the policeman that was killed.
Yeah.
They had known each other, Miss Mary, for quite some time.
They had.
Yes, ma'am. Ruby introduced Oswald to Tippit in February '63. J.D. Tippit came to the book depository and visited Oswald at least 3 times in the short time he
How do you
worked
know
there.
that?
Witnesses that worked there in the building like you did and saw him. Yes, ma'am. Bill Shelley, one of them.
Really?
And he told the Warren Commission that. Mr. Shelley.
Well, I just think the Warren Commission, because I guess the way they did us and all the
Oh, yeah,
publishers,
and yeah,
I think they got as straight and
as
so
they could.
as they could from the witnesses.
And
And of
what-
course, if they got witnesses that told them something.
Now, I don't know if you know about the little black boy Amos Ewins. He's still living. He was sitting across the street from where you were standing. And then Howard Brennan, the man in the construction hat.
See, I don't remember any of that.
Yeah, see, they were the only two.
Because I'll tell you this, I've never been to the museum.
See, yeah, that's what. And a lot of people don't.
Well, I
You know
was.
what Billy Lovelady told me?
What?
He said, and he told me this in '71. He said, man, when I left Dallas, He said, I feel like I was born again. He said, I feel like I come out of my mother's womb.
Well,
That's what he said.
I had lived enough of that,
Yeah, he was
And-
glad to leave here.
and I didn't want to, I think by now I wouldn't maybe mind to go down there, but
Well, this is the 45th anniversary, and Bill and Miss Poulter, they come every year.
they do,
So if you feel up to it,
yeah.
and you
I
come
might-
down,
I might do
get
it.
with us, give Bill a call, and you got
Yeah.
my number and Steve,
Yeah,
and we'll all, yeah, because everybody goes down on that day, November 20th.
And-
It'll be on a Saturday.
The-
This will be the 45th anniversary.
yeah. I could figure that out because my baby boy was born in 1961.
61.
And he was 2 years old when
Yes, ma'am.
the president was
What month was he born?
August the 16th.
August, okay.
And
young
his
cousin.
son was born August the 22nd,
Yeah.
many years later, obviously. But
Yeah, my brother was young. He was born March 14th of 61.
my daughter was
You got it all?
6 years
Yeah,
older.
it ran out of tape.
Okay.
She
Just a
was,
minute ago.
my daughter was 8,
Yes,
and
ma'am.
she